Started here. All right, thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here, making the trek sometimes from LA or all over the state to come up to this meeting. This is the 5th workshop now we have had on our planning process. We have at least 2 more scheduled and have certainly appreciated all the input we've received thus far. Before we get started, have to do some housekeeping issues. Bathrooms, for anyone who needs them, you go out the door, go to the left and wrap around, and they're over here. Water fountains are there as well. In the case of that we need to evacuate in the event of an emergency, we go to, I think that way, to J. Neely Johnson Park. It's on 11th Street, 516 11th Street. This is new. We've moved from the central, or from Cesar Chavez, for those that know our usual drill here. And we're temporarily on 11th and I don't know, E or something. J. Neely Park. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the Short-Lived Climate Pollutant webpage after the workshop. In order for us to address any comments on the environmental analysis, we're asking the audience during the audience participation and questions part to come up to the microphone here at the front of the room and please identify yourself before making any comments. That'll just facilitate our responses to those. Those of you that are providing oral comments are also asked to submit your comments in writing if you're inclined to the web address that will be provided at the end of the presentation. Folks on the phone, as well as in the audience, I suppose, we're also accepting comments via email, and I'll show the address for that shortly here. So as I mentioned, this is the 5th workshop. We have 2 more planned next week in Bakersfield. We're doing a double header on the 3rd. So hopefully anybody who is inclined to keep participating in these or who isn't able to participate in this one can come to Bakersfield. We're going to have, are we simulcasting the Bakersfield one in Fresno and Modesto as well? So, and the webcast for that too. So lots of opportunities here to participate. So today we are I'll go through this presentation. My name is Ryan McCarthy, by the way. I'm a science advisor here at the ARB. Dave Mell and Marcel Sirovic, I don't know where Marcel is. Dave Mell and Marcel have been leading development of this plan. Emily Wimberger here is our lead economist and did the economic piece. Glenn Gallagher is in our research division and chief of all things HFC. And we are also joined today, gratefully, thank you for coming, with CalRecycle, Evan Johnson, Jenny Lester Moffitt from CDFA, and Claire Johns from the Resources Agency, who we really worked I think hand in hand, hopefully they think hand in hand too, on many of the critical pieces of this plan related to ag, dairies, and waste. We also worked a lot with the water boards and others who aren't up here today but may be in the audience, and we're thankful for their participation and grace throughout this process working with us. So I'll give a presentation quickly. We're expecting Assemblymember Cooper to come, and when he does, we'll open up the floor for him to make some comments. We're also going to have some comments from the EJAC. Are they here? Maybe not. If they're here, we'll let them come up and give some comments. Then we'll open it up for discussion and questions from the audience. Email comments, auditorium@calepa.ca.gov. That's the address to use today. Again, please send along your comments if you're out there on the web. So short-lived climate pollutants is something California has been working on for a long time in many ways, especially on black carbon. We're a leader in this space. We did have early actions under AB 32 to address methane and HFCs, but we realized that we haven't been giving it the focus that it that it deserves and that it needs. We had really been focused, I think, in the early stages of AB 32 and scoping plan development on CO2 and energy-related emissions. So we recognized this in the 2014 scoping plan update, and subsequently the legislature, Senator Lara, his bill, Senate Bill 605, required us to develop this plan. The governor has acknowledged it as one of the pillars to addressing climate change through at least 2030, and he has talked about the goals in this plan in Paris and New York and various international climate forums. I think you've seen a lot about this now if you follow these issues particularly closely in the news and media. And I think just since we started this process with a concept paper last May, short-lived climate pollutants have become much more part of the vernacular. And I'm less inclined to go into all the background science than I once was back then. And I think that's not just our efforts in California, obviously, but I think this is really something that's gaining focus nationally and internationally. The Obama administration is obviously doing a lot on this as well, both methane and HFCs. So what we're presenting today is a updated draft. We released a draft report back in September, had 3 workshops in October. Before that, we had a concept paper and a workshop that we had in May and June of 2015. So this is the 3rd step in the process. This is a revised proposed draft that we will be presenting to our board as an informational item at the May board meeting on May 19th. As I mentioned, we're already a leader on black carbon. We've reduced black carbon emissions by over 90% over the last 5 decades, mostly due to our air quality rules related to diesel engines and other on-road vehicles, as well as off-road vehicles. This has had a tremendous impact on health in California as well as climate. There's a lot of, if the whole world did what California had done or has done already on black carbon, we would be saving millions of lives per year and make a significant dent on climate change immediately. We've also done a lot on methane and HFCs, as I mentioned. The impact, so what we've done on black carbon is we've significantly reduced emissions. Of course, black carbon and particulate matter are still important air pollutants, and we do not have entirely clean air in California yet, so there's more to do. On methane, we have landfill regulations. We're developing oil and gas regulations, and what we've done through early action measures under AB 32 is to essentially make methane emissions flat over time to level them off. So obviously we need to do more there. HFCs are the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in California and also globally. We adopted 4 early action measures under AB 32 that have slowed their growth by about 25% through 2030, but they're still an increasing source of emissions in California, so there's more to do there as well. The proposed strategy, this was in the draft and is unchanged in the updated draft here, includes overarching targets for reducing short-lived climate pollutant emissions in California, 40 to 50% by 2030. That's 40% for methane and HFCs from current levels being 2013, which is the latest inventory information available, and 50% for non-forest black carbon emissions. We've received a lot of comments on the forestry piece and how we include that. And our response is, yes, forestry, as we'll discuss, is obviously a critically important sector and obviously an important and largest source of black carbon in California. But it's one that is difficult to entirely control, and it's one that there are subsequent or parallel planning efforts underway right now that will develop targets and goals for forest management and carbon storage and other priorities in the forest, which will really, I think, inform what appropriate targets for that might be, whether it's black carbon or anything else. This is the breakdown of our black carbon emissions in California currently and projected into the future, not including the forestry piece. Forestry is about 2/3 of California's black carbon emissions on a typical wildfire year. So it's obviously the big one, but there's also a lot of volatility or fluctuation in that from year to year. Sometimes wildfires are much more severe and produce a lot more black carbon, and sometimes it's less of a wildfire year. So, but an average year, it's about 2/3. Currently, on-road diesel and off-road mobile sources are large sources. There were even bigger portions in the recent past and further back past. But our existing rules are really going to get at that on-road piece in particular. So you see by 2030, on-road diesel goes from about 18% to 1% of the share of black carbon. And overall black carbon is declining in that time frame too. What that means is other sectors, fireplaces and wood stoves is a good example, take up an increasing share of emissions. And we really have to shift our focus to those other sectors. So fireplaces, fuel combustion, stationary combustion, and off-road mobile sources together almost 3/4 of our emissions of black carbon in 2030. Our existing programs, as I mentioned, are doing a lot. I'll show a graph in a minute that really illustrates that effectively. But this just lists a number of them, and the big dramatic changes are from our in-use and diesel engine rules, which are significantly reducing on-road as well as off-road mobile sources. But we have clean fuels, we have shipping standards, we have incentive programs to help get clean trucks out there and other equipment. And there's limits at the local level as well as through state guidance on prescribed burning, agricultural burning, residential burning, and others. So the impact of these existing rules is shown here. You see on-road diesel gets virtually eliminated by 2020. Off-road mobile, there's a lot of progress as well, and gasoline continues to, or light-duty vehicles continue to decline as well. We're proposing in the proposed strategy, this has not changed really since the draft, but proposing an incentive program, which is now in the governor's budget. He's proposed $40 million for an incentive program for efficient wood stoves and wood stove conversions. And we think also through parallel planning efforts on the air quality side, through state implementation planning, through sustainable freight planning, as well as on the CO2 side, scoping plan efforts and other efforts to use energy more efficiently and convert to renewable energy and away from combustion. We'll get additional black carbon reductions into the future, and we think those efforts will help us get to the target in 2030. One of the things we heard loud and clear at our last workshops after the first draft came out was concerns and comments on the forestry section. This draft, we really went back to the drawing board on the forestry section, working with Claire and the Resources Agency and Kim at CAL FIRE and CAL FIRE. And I think basically have a whole new forestry section here. Again, it's sort of the first piece, and not even the first piece anymore, but one piece in a set of planning efforts related to forestry that are really taking shape this year and maybe into next year, including the scoping plan and the forest carbon plan. So we're not trying to get ahead of those efforts, which will take a much more holistic and comprehensive view of the forestry sector, as well as defining specific targets for forestry management and carbon sequestration in our forests. But we did lay out, I think, some initial steps on that vision focused on black carbon and reducing wildfires, which is the primary source of black carbon from our forests. And that includes, increasing the rate of fuel reduction pursuant to the governor's emergency order on forests, as well as just in line with efforts we need to help get our forests to healthy status. We want to support market development for beneficial uses of woody waste coming from our forests. We think that'll help to scale investment and get private sector investment into healthy forest management. We want to support those efforts through research, and we certainly want to make sure that this strategy is in line and integrated with those other planning efforts underway, as well as everything that may come on forests in California. Black carbon is obviously an important piece from forests, but not the only piece. So we need to make sure that we're considering carbon and watersheds and ecosystem services and black carbon and all the other priorities of our forests' economic development all together hand in hand. So that's the black carbon piece. On methane, I look at the inventory of methane here, and it doesn't change too much between 2013 and 2030. But two things jump out. One is the dairy industry here. Dairy enteric and dairy manure together are 45% of our emissions currently, and stay about 45% in 2030. And the other is if you look at landfills and dairy manure, that's 45% of the inventory as well. And those are organic waste streams in California that we think we can capture and put to beneficial use and get some value from. And the economic analysis that I'll discuss briefly a little bit later really builds that out. We need to invest to get those benefits, and we need to work together to make sure that we can unlock value from this resource, but we think we can. And so one of the sort of themes or principles that we've laid out in the concept paper and in the proposed draft and in this draft is really to try to capture value from this waste stream in California, from these organic waste streams in California that are otherwise, rotting in landfills or going into the air as methane. The woody biomass in the forestry certainly fits into that concept and principle as well. So this is sort of in one summary table, the proposed measures to meet our 40% reduction target. I should have said this up front, but the accounting here and used in the plan uses 20-year global warming potential values. From the fourth assessment of the IPCC, for those of you in the weeds here, for methane and HFCs, and the fifth assessment for black carbon, just because there was no fourth assessment value. But the fourth assessment is what we've used in our programs, or are moving to in our programs, and generally what the international community uses. And we think that 20-year GWPs is an appropriate representation of the impact of short-lived climate pollutants. That's not to say that any of our programs are going to change to using 20-year accounting, but we think for the sake of presenting this plan, it makes sense. So the bulk of the reductions presented in this plan or proposed in this plan come from changes to dairy manure management practices. That's about 50% of our reductions in this plan by 2030. But all the other sectors contribute as well. The landfill one in particular shows 5 million tons of reductions in 2030, but that grows significantly into the future. Landfills, as you pull out organics from landfills, really accumulates the benefit over time. So that grows to, I think, 20 million tons or 21 million tons by 2050. So on the dairies, we've proposed targets. The targets are not different from what was in the first draft plan of 20% reductions by 2020, 50% reduction by 2025, and 75% reduction in manure methane emissions from dairies by 2030. Those targets, meaning the 75% reduction in manure methane by 2030, would mean more than a 40% reduction in overall dairy sector emissions by 2030. If you include the goals for enteric fermentation to reduce by 25% by 2030, that's a 50% reduction in methane emissions from the sector by 2030. What is new in this plan, there's a few changes in dealing with how we would approach meeting these targets, but we're proposing to open a regulation or regulatory process in 2017 to meet the manure management goal by 2030. That would be, a thorough, detailed regulatory process that I expect take, a couple of years, if not more, to develop, and then a couple of years perhaps to implement. And through that process, we'll look at what makes the most sense, where there's been, what the levels of market support are, how the barriers that currently exist are looking, and our progress towards overcoming them, to design and develop an appropriate regulatory phase-in and process to meet the goals. The landfill piece has not changed significantly. We proposed in the draft plan to effectively eliminate organics and organic disposal in California landfills by 2025 through a regulation that would be developed with ARB and CalRecycle working together by 2018. That is still in there, but what is new is we've included a food waste prevention and rescue goal as part of this. We want to set a target of 10% of rescuing 10% of food waste by 2020 and 20% by 2025. This is something that CalRecycle, I think, would take a lead on, but certainly we are interested in too, through incentives, through working with project developers and others, trying to make sure that usable food is not going to a landfill, certainly, but also not to a digester or a compost facility if we can actually feed that to people and help to reduce food insecurity in our communities and capture a lot of value from that. So that is a new component here. Wastewater treatment plants, we think, are an opportunity with existing and excess capacity to utilize some food waste in particular and get some beneficial use out of that waste and get it out of landfills. That's something we want to explore further. It's explored in our economic analysis, but certainly that deserves deeper focus as well and attention, so we're going to continue to look at that. On the oil and gas sector, ARB is developing a regulation this year to reduce fugitive emissions from the production, processing, and storage. And the PUC has a process underway related to Senate Bill 1371 by Senator Leno to minimize methane leaks from natural gas pipelines. And that is expected to be completed next year. So we think together these efforts with our continued ongoing monitoring to better identify leaks and understand where they're coming from pursuant to AB 1496, I believe, and other efforts. We think this represents a pretty good approach and thorough approach to the oil and gas sector, which is already largely underway and in development. We expect that these efforts can get us to meet the President's goal of reducing oil and gas sector methane emissions by 40 to 45% by 2025. On HFCs, the large source is refrigeration in various sectors. That continues to be the source, and we're projecting increased emissions over time without further steps to reduce emissions. But we think we can reduce emissions. And one sort of commonly accepted and understood, I think, approach on this is that phasing down the use of HFCs, hopefully globally under the Montreal Protocol, is probably the single most important and effective thing we can do in this sector. And on that, there has been a lot of progress just in the last week, announcements coming from the President after he visited Saudi Arabia, joint announcements from the Saudis and the U.S. on commitment to do this, and other announcements in the last week out of Africa and others, just building support and momentum for getting an agreement this year. So we're hopeful there will be an agreement. I think in July is when the next meeting is on that, to phase down the use of HFCs globally under the Montreal Protocol. If that doesn't happen, then California may consider its own phase down. Europe's already doing one. Other countries are talking about it or are beginning to implement phase downs as well. So we would look at what they're doing and try to do the same. That said, I think a lot of the phase down schedules that are proposed, take a few years to implement, and there's opportunities today in many applications to get low GWP refrigerants into systems or to upgrade and replace systems that can also have efficiency benefits, I'll add. And we don't want to let those go. So we're proposing some specific sale bans and prohibitions on new equipment, as well as an incentive program, which the governor has proposed $20 million for, to try to get these reductions as quickly as possible, even while a phase down is taking effect. So we did an economic analysis in this section that is new compared to the previous draft. Certainly invite everyone here and listening to look at that piece, scrutinize that piece, dig into the appendix, Appendix D, and there's some long tables in that appendix that list all of our assumptions, especially for the dairy manure piece and the landfill piece. And we would certainly welcome any feedback on the economic analysis and assumptions, and especially appreciate any citable references that you can offer for any alternative assumptions that you might propose. But what we did, this is sort of a first stab at this, and any regulatory development that would come from anything pursuant to this plan will have its own, public process, its own economic analysis, probably dig deeper and do a more thorough economic analysis than we did here. But we took a first stab, and I think a decent one, and a fairly appropriate one, to look at the potential costs and potential revenues or savings associated with these measures. So it includes direct economic costs, revenue, and savings. It doesn't include any societal costs or benefits associated with things. And what we found is that implementing the measures could, it does require many billions of dollars of investment, but there is also many billions of dollars of potential revenue and energy savings. And some of these things can pan out. The landfill, putting organics waste streams to beneficial use from landfills or dairy manure, especially if you can capture value from the low carbon fuel standard or the renewable fuel standard and get it into the transportation sector, where we think that there's also a lot of environmental benefit. That can potentially be very attractive and profitable, especially at current credit prices in those markets. So that's something that we want to do all we can to enable that pathway. It's sort of new in California to be able to access pipelines and get biogas into the pipelines, so we need to continue to work through some of those barriers to access and to market. But that is a potential opportunity that looks very attractive from an economic analysis perspective. On the HFCs, there's energy efficiency savings that can be associated with a lot of these efforts that can almost pay for them as well. And collectively, all these measures together, whether they are potentially profitable or even costly and might need some support from other sources, still look like relatively low-cost opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly in California. We released, a draft environmental analysis with the strategy 2 weeks ago. Staff determined that the proposed actions in the proposed strategy may potentially have significant effects to some resource areas. However, these impacts are mainly due to short-term construction-related activities. Staff and ARB are committed to working with other state and local agencies to ensure that any steps taken pursuant to this proposed strategy avoid any environmental trade-offs and maximize potential environmental benefits where feasible. The draft environmental analysis was released for a 45-day comment period, which started on April 11th and will end on May 26th, 2016. And staff will prepare written responses to all relevant draft environmental analysis comments received, including those received at these workshops. So we appreciate, again, you speaking into the microphone so we can make sure we're tracking all of these. Next steps, we're having a double header of workshops next week in Bakersfield on May 3rd, presenting the strategy to the board on May 19th. May 26th, as I just mentioned, the comment period ends for the draft environmental analysis and strategy. You can submit comments at the email or at the web link linked there. And in the late summer or early fall, we will present the final strategy and responses to the environmental analysis to the board for approval. With that, my contact information is here, as well as Emily, our economist, and Glenn Gallagher. Certainly you can reach out to Dave or Marcel or others with any comments or questions as well. Again, appreciate you being here, and I look forward to the discussion. Before we get there, Assemblymember Cooper has joined us, and I'd like to invite him to come give some comments. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to see you all. I'm glad to be here. I'm Jim Cooper. I represent the 9th Assembly District, which covers part of Sacramento County. It starts at Sutterville and I-5 and goes all the way to the end of Lodi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here this morning. Let me start by acknowledging the importance of reducing greenhouse gases. We all know climate change is very real and must be addressed not just here in California, but across the globe. How we address it, however, is equally important. I want to focus specifically on the ARB's efforts to reduce dairy methane emissions. I hear constantly from my constituents on this issue. My district is in the forefront of developing dairy digesters and further reducing methane emissions. 4 of the state's 13 operating digesters at dairies are located in my district. Much of the reason for that early success is due to the good efforts of SMUD, who has worked cooperatively with dairy families to remove barriers and provide energy contracts and financing to help pave the way for success. As we seek to expand these positive steps throughout the state, it is critically important that we have a concrete plan on how to get there and how we're going to pay for it. Setting goals to reduce dairy methane emissions by 75% is certainly ambitious, and there's nothing wrong with ARB's goal at creating a low-carbon industry in California. In fact, by nearly every measure, California dairy families are already achieving a low-carbon footprint for every gallon of milk produced and setting an example for the rest of the world. It has been estimated that the dairy industry is going to meet the 2030 goals of reducing manure management methane emissions by 75% using only digesters, that we would have to install over 600 digesters at California's largest dairies. Since 2000, about 24 dairy manure digesters have been built in California, and currently only 13 of those are still operating today. However, regulating an additional 75% reduction in dairy manure methane reductions is troubling and will likely hurt rather than help the effort. Regulating a 75% reduction when the plan acknowledges there is no clear path to achieving those reductions is problematic. Setting California's renowned family-owned dairies up for failure is not appropriate and will reflect poorly on the great state, which often claims to be demonstrating for the rest of the world how to address a critical issue while producing the abundant amount of agricultural commodities that help feed and clothe the world. The short-lived climate pollutants plan is not clear on how to achieve a 75% reduction. It also lacks on the financial commitment necessary to achieve ARB's goal. The plan acknowledges that the need for state incentives of $100 million annually for 5 years, and just to get started, reducing dairy methane emissions. Unfortunately, the governor's proposed budget currently dedicates only $35 million of the $500 million needed. It's very relevant to point out that nationally, dairies have reduced their carbon footprint by over 60% per gallon of milk in the last 70 years, and that effort continues to improve in efficiency. However, it will take significant investment from the state to accelerate the pace and put infrastructure in place to even get partway to their overly aggressive goals. If ARB puts these mandatory reductions in place before the investment in research and development, the funding and the dairies will disappear, along with a very promising family-owned sector of the business in California. The San Joaquin Valley already suffers from high employment and poverty. Making that worse by encouraging dairies to leave the state will only exacerbate the problems. Last year, the legislature passed the most stringent antibiotic laws in the nation for our animal herds. We don't want to see our dairies leave the state of California and see milk and cheese shipped in from out of state, not knowing how those animals are maintained. I look forward to working with you to set realistic goals to further reduce dairy methane emissions on a fully developed plan with adequate financial incentives. We can achieve these great things if we start with the right approach. I'd also like to mention that my office is sponsoring a tour of a dairy with a methane digester in my district this Thursday at noon, leaving from the west steps of the Capitol. I encourage the ARB and others to come and learn about what California's families' dairies are already doing to combat climate change and about how the SLCP will impact California's agricultural industry. Thank you for your time this morning. And if anybody's interested in going on the tour on Thursday, you can contact my office at 319-2009. We're still taking reservations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. I do look forward to joining you on the tour, and I think a number of folks from ARB are planning on attending as well. I would like to offer our other state agencies a chance to make a few comments here. They can be brief or longer as they wish, but I did just want to reiterate that they've been very helpful and I think gracious in working with us through this process, and want to let them add any comments they have. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. I'm looking at a full room, so I don't want to take too long here, but I did just want to take a second to thank ARB for having a very inclusive process. They've been very good about engaging CalRecycle, and I don't want to speak for the others, but I think the rest of the agencies and departments up here, and those that were touched on in this report in developing some of the goals and targets that are in this plan. I think that it's very ambitious, but I do think it aligns pretty closely with what is already in language, both in AB 341, the legislation that outlines the goals of 75% recycling in California, and with goals outlined in prior documents like the scoping plan and others. So I guess I'll just wrap up and say thank you very much, Ryan and Emily and Marcel and everybody for engaging CalRecycle on this. I really appreciate it and look forward to hearing everybody's comments.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate what Evan said, that it's been a very engaging process that ARB has had with Department of Food and Ag. Department of Food and Ag has been engaged with respect to dairy methane manure and other methane emissions. And we look forward to continuing that dialogue. Certainly the comments that we just heard really in working with ARB on developing a plan and a path for dairies to achieve these goals will be very important. And CDFA is committed to working with ARB on that. And I look forward to hearing from everyone here in the audience today on your thoughts as well. So thank you for being here and look forward to hearing your comments.
Hi, Claire Johns here with the Natural Resources Agency, and I'll add to the chorus of thanks to ARB as well as all the stakeholders who submitted comments. And I'm looking specifically at the black carbon and forest piece, although there's much to comment on within this document. And I'll maybe preempt some of the comments and say that we also noticed, and it was intentional, that forest carbon is the only category of emissions in the short-lived climate pollutant plan that doesn't have a specific numerical target attached to the reductions. And that's because we believe that forests need to be treated holistically, and by honing in on just the black carbon emissions, we would potentially limit the ability to manage forests holistically. And as well as Ryan mentioned, that year-to-year variability makes it difficult to specify a certain emission reduction target because it's relatively difficult to establish a baseline to work from. And of course, with managing forests, we'll need to factor climate change itself into how they're managed and how black carbon emission reductions from forests are pursued. So I think going forward, we look forward to continuing to work with ARB and the other agencies and departments. I speak for myself and at the Resource Agency as well as CAL FIRE and others, and you all, and make sure that we develop an accounting and forest health management program that really enables black carbon emission reductions from wildfire and treats those holistically with other forest management practices, including disposal pathways like bioenergy.
Thank you. And thanks all for being here, and I'll certainly invite you to answer some questions I imagine that come up. Do we have any members of the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee in the audience who would like to make some remarks? Anybody? Okay, well with that, I would invite all of you to participate now. Again, encourage you to come up to the microphone here. If you're inclined to identify yourself and your affiliation, please do. And we'll just open it up to comment.
That's good. I appreciate for this seminar what you organize, and my recommendation actually is, and and comment that do we know what type of air we breathe right now? So I want to ask to have some type of online, outside, anywhere, uh, indicators that everyone can see and be aware what type of air we breathe right now. So this regarding all Californians. Also to have some also, like you have inside regarding events, to have also outside also targets and also chemicals in the air, because we don't know what type of air we have. So this is very important. And then everyone will be more aware, and hopefully we will have our goals to meet sooner. Regarding dairy market, to encourage more orchards in California, to encourage more of, nuts and fruits, more healthier to our health in whole California. This is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a lot of information available as well as local air districts on our current air quality, and we can follow up and direct you towards those resources.
Good morning, Julia Levin with the Bioenergy Association of California. Is this on? I can't hear. Okay, I want to start by thanking you. I said this to Ryan earlier. I think this document is going to be one of the most important things that the state has done or will do for a very long time. I do think that the proposed strategy is much, much stronger than the previous versions, particularly because the addition of a really strong chapter on black carbon from wildfire. Claire, it was interesting. You did preempt one of my comments. I was going to ask the state to set numeric goals, and I do still think we would totally agree with Claire Johns that we need to look at the forests in a holistic manner. But still within a holistic manner, at some point, we will need numeric goals and a baseline for what is the level of black carbon emissions from our forests and what is the loss of carbon sequestration that we can tolerate in California and still meet our overall climate goals. But in general, the proposed strategy provides an just outstanding and very, very compelling statement of the science and how important this issue is. Some of the goals, actually many of the goals are very aggressive, and they are going to require massive amounts of public investment. And I'm not exaggerating when I use the word massive, particularly in the solid waste and the dairy sectors, which do have aggressive numeric goals. It is going to require really significant ongoing public investment to achieve those goals. We do support the goals, and bioenergy can play a huge role in meeting the goals of the strategy, but we can't get there without hundreds of millions of dollars, probably for many years to come, invested in these sectors. In the dairy sector, we think it's very important when the state, as the state is looking at a regulatory approach, to manage the transition to a regulatory approach in a way that doesn't, in effect, reverse the gains that we will hopefully make with public investment in the near term. This is an industry, Jenny, you know as well as anyone, that's gone through a lot of boom and bust already. And we strongly support investing a lot of public money in the dairy digester industry to jumpstart the market. But as we transition to a regulatory approach, we want to be sure that that doesn't suddenly cut the legs out from under this really nascent industry that is still struggling in California, even with significant public investment. On the wastewater sector, I think it's really important that the state look at the opportunity for existing wastewater facilities. We have more than 500 in California, many of which have anaerobic digestion on site and could cost effectively take a large part of the food waste and fats, oil and grease, fog. That's not in place of other facilities in the solid waste sector, but it could be a very cost-effective way to get there. And we urge the state to look at this opportunity in much more detail. And finally, my ongoing refrain, there is a critical agency that is almost never at the table with all of you working so hard in this area, and that is the Public Utilities Commission. Many of the strategies proposed in this draft actually require the PUC to take action, to be able to put biogas in pipelines, to get biopower onto our transmission lines, and to remove other regulatory barriers. We really need the PUC to be a full participant in the implementation of this strategy. So thank you all very, very much. We're looking forward to seeing the final and implementing this. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could just encourage you all to speak very clearly and directly into the microphone so that we can capture remarks and comments and so that the folks on the internet can hear you. I do want to add one piece on the dairy piece, just because this has come up, and I think I neglected a couple terms. One word that that is in our report that I did not, I neglected to say in my comments was the word leakage, and certainly that is something that we will consider during the regulatory process. We don't want to let emissions and dairies just go out of state so that emissions are going up elsewhere. And we're not actually reducing emissions here. We want to be reducing global greenhouse gas emissions with our efforts. And so certainly we will be trying to balance incentives, regulation to make sure that we're reducing emissions in California as well as globally and not just displacing them. Another comment on the impact of regulation. In the draft, we had originally proposed to regulate new and expanding dairies fairly soon, and acknowledged that would make new projects offset credits under cap and trade unavailable for new projects. That didn't necessarily seem like the right approach, which is why we've adjusted our approach in this plan. But I do want to just be clear on the impact there. The way our offset program works is you get a 10-year crediting period for any project developed, and that would not change once a regulation took effect. So if you build a project, it's in place before regulation takes effect. You get your 10 years of offset credits, and the same would apply to LCFS credits. You would get that reduction included in your LCFS pathway. Once a regulation is in place, new projects would not be able to get offset credits. And the low carbon fuel standard would not account for that methane destruction credit anymore, just petroleum displacement. So you'd have a higher carbon intensity, although you could still get LCFS credits. So we are, trying to acknowledge that goes away. I think it's important to understand that it goes away for new projects, and if you get your project in, sooner rather than later and before regulation would take effect, then you could still get those credits as you would with or without regulation. So I'm sure we'll hear more on that. But.
Can you actually hear me? Good. Okay, great. Hi, my name is Nathan Banks, and I'm here today representing PG&E. And there are two main points I want to touch on today. Will be broader in our written comments, but I want to talk about the methane reduction goals and also the topic of interconnection, which is featured prominently in the report. So I just first of all want to say that we really applaud your continued work to address short-lived climate pollutants, and we really see ourselves as a committed partner in addressing this issue and reaching, there we go, California's climate goals. And we do believe that GHG targets are an essential part of an integrated and flexible statewide approach to GHG reduction. They provide an important end goal towards which our portfolio of reduction actions can be oriented. And we're dedicated to providing safe, reliable natural gas service in a responsible and environmentally sensitive manner. And we've already taken voluntary steps to reduce natural gas leaks from our system by deploying advanced technologies, improving leak detection, repairing greater percentage of leaks, replacing pipeline infrastructure, and we've really put our money where our mouth is and received some recognition for this. PG&E has undergone rigorous certification process, PAS 551 and ISO 55001, for the management of our physical assets, and we're the only natural gas utility to achieve the certification in the country so far. And we were also recognized by the Obama administration for being one of 5 natural gas utilities nationwide for collaborating to address these key technical and regulatory factors, addressing methane emissions reductions opportunities. So we're here with you. The one thing I want to bring up today on the issue of methane targets is that we do support ARB's desire to drive additional GHG emissions from the natural gas sector. But we do have outstanding questions about the sector-specific target, including the quantification of the emissions reductions that will be delivered by many of the programs that are underdeveloped right now, which are listed in the report. If this suite of measures proves insufficient to meet the sector-specific goal, we would ask ARB to further explore the feasibility and cost-effectiveness of driving additional methane emission reductions in the sector. And we recommend that the natural gas sector methane reduction goal in the report consider the appropriateness of mirroring the federal target in light of our unique circumstances, particularly all the all of the programs that are currently under discussion and in development. And quickly on the subject of interconnection, committed to working with bioenergy developers, and we view renewable natural gas as a potential pathway to achieve many of California's important goals. There are a lot of challenges that come with expanding renewable natural gas in the system. These include availability of feedstock processing sites, capital cost and financing, technology issues, operational issues, gas purity concerns. Many of these are appropriately recognized in the report. We thank you for your attention to that. And we're interested in partnering with the state and other stakeholders to bring down the cost of renewable natural gas to ensure it can be delivered safely and reliably. We do maintain that the costs of the broad societal benefits that could be brought from this be borne by society as a whole and not just utility customers. So with that, thank you for your time.
Morning, my name is Evan Edgar, California Compost Coalition and Clean Fleets. We support the strategy to divert organics from the landfill. By diverting organics, we do 4 pillars at the same time. By taking the methane out of the landfill, we can make low carbon fuel and renewable energy, and the digestate goes to healthy soils. So we support the Healthy Soils Initiative, so we highly support the strategy. One thing happened in California for the last 4 years in a row, the amount of disposal has been increasing in the landfills since 2012. Even though we have mandatory commercial recycling that started in 2012, we had mandatory organic recycling that started this year, we're not getting the tons we need to develop the facilities that are in process that we're entitling for compost and standalone anaerobic digestion at recycling facilities, at compost facilities, and some at landfills even. So we need to have direct regulation to effectively ban organics from the landfill because of the phase-in collection under AB 341 and phase-in collection under AB 1826 is not being enforced at the way it could be at CalRecycle. So we do need the hammer at CARB in order to have the effective ban organics with the regulation starting in 2018. Because right now, California will not make the 75% goal by 2020. We're not even going to make the 60% recycling goal by 2020, at the rate we're going today. So I'm here today on behalf of the California Compost Coalition and Clean Fleets. We're building the facilities. We want to take the biomethane and put it into the tank in order to have a carbon negative fleet for our industry. We can get off diesel. We can get off landfills by 2025. Thank you.
Morning, this is Kevin Messner. I'm with Political Logic. I represent the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. So I wanted to touch on refrigerators first, residential refrigerators. The appliance industry is moving already to potential new refrigerants or trying to get there. But there are barriers to get there, and there are barriers that are outside the control of manufacturers. And you recognize this in the report. The safety standards are stricter in the U.S. than there are anywhere else in the world on these flammable refrigerants. And the manufacturers don't have control over how those safety standards are operated. So those are things that are beyond the industry's control. So by setting arbitrary dates, saying you need to be here by then, by this time, and irrespective of the safety standards that are in place is problematic. So there's safety standards for employees, there's safety issues for consumers that have to be addressed. I think the report recognizes that and with a few sentences, which is good, but I wanted to emphasize that that is an importance. And the timing that the industry is committed to of 2024 is with coordination with others. And to try to do this with others, we have been trying to get UL and Safety Standards to act in this area for years and get CPSC and get EPA and others to join in to help us with this. And it's finally taking root. But CARB's, the proposed incentive, if the legislature actually approves the funding for this, maybe that's an area where those incentives could be used to help smooth the way to help address this, because those barriers need to be reduced in order for us to get there. Lastly, I wanted to mention the room air conditioners, dehumidifiers, and portable air conditioning. I realize it's a strategy document, but there should be at least a tint of reality there. And a 2021 is for those, and I don't understand or I don't even see in the document where a justification for that is. Even EPA, has not been shy in this area, is not even proposing anything for these products. There's an assumption out there maybe folks are going to go to R32. That's one possible chemical. Patent issues need to be addressed. There's a lot of things that have to, there's not this overriding issue that's, or I shouldn't say overriding issue, but there's not, for refrigerators, you have hydrocarbon refrigerators in other parts of the world. There's different safety standards. For these other products, there's nothing necessarily out there. So I would urge you, even though it's a strategy document, to dial that back, at least have something that you can justify to some extent, which I haven't seen in that proposal. So I'd encourage you to retake a look at those products. Lastly, it would be good to hear from CARB on how their view is on the authority that they have to move on post-2020. That would be helpful information to have as we move forward. Thank you. I'll wait until the CARB authority issue is addressed.
Well, you know, I think AB 32 clearly says that it is the intent of the legislature to continue reducing emissions, and ARB should advise and plan on how to do so. I don't think we're doing anything other than that in this document, but do you want to add anything? Okay. Glenn, do you have any?
Thank you for the comments. We are very aware that these are challenging goals, and we're working with all the stakeholders to try to implement the HFC reductions in new equipment as when feasible and when it makes sense. And we'll continue working with the stakeholders. And definitely, the standards issue is going to be a challenge to overcome, but we're working on it. We're engaged.
My name is Stacy Sullivan. I'm the Policy Director for Sustainable Conservation. First, I'd like to thank ARB for its generous citations of the study that we did last year on methane reductions from dairies. Close? Okay. Boy, when I used to play in bands, they said, don't do that. But I do have a few questions and comments. I appreciate Mr. McCarthy mentioning the leakage issue. We are an environmental organization. We've been working closely with the dairy industry on trying to reduce methane emissions. But our concern is getting a true environmental benefit out of this action and any other action. And we are very concerned about the leakage issue, and we're concerned that and so I appreciate your saying that is at the forefront of your thinking. However, there are things in this strategy that I think need to be reconciled or sorted out in order to really address that issue. We, along with other organizations, made comments originally on this about the challenges that were presented by the targets that were set for dairies. And we're looking for more guidance on how ARB saw those goals being met. Unfortunately, it seems like we've had the perverse effect of increasing the focus on regulation as a way to get to those targets. We think that we're afraid that in and of itself could be a very serious contributor to the leakage issue. We also noticed in the economic analysis a great deal of emphasis being placed on the conversion of dairies from flush systems to scrape systems, and certain assumptions being made on what the capital costs would be for those conversions. Quite frankly, we're not sure what that's based on. One of the points we made in the study cited by ARB is the fact that there is very little hard data about the conversion from flush to scrape dairies, particularly in California. And so to premise, I think 4 out of the 5 options that are created for dairies have this flush to scrape element in them. And in our minds, that's depending on a very fragile database. And so we would reiterate the comment that we made earlier in this process that and this is also a budgetary issue, is that there needs to be a very serious commitment to some really stringent, intense research on some of these options if dairies are going to be asked to meet these goals, and that meeting those goals is dependent on the adoption of these technologies. Then we need to know what the costs of the technologies are, what the real-world implications of them are, what the other environmental impacts might be on air quality. I say that's referred to in general, but where are the specifics? If this is going to be a pillar in your strategy for how dairies meet these goals, then we really need a lot more data than we have now, and we need a commitment from the state to get it. We're going to have more extensive comments that we will submit in writing, but these are sort of initial thoughts. We also would just like to say that we are very interested in the issue of turning dairy manure into compost as part of the flush, if you do go into dry management or with digestate. We appreciate the reference to it. We think that it's important that the SLCP be as integrated as possible with the Healthy Soils Initiative, and that there also be some focus on specific, we were talking about barriers that might exist, on focus on the barriers that currently exist in interagency relationships and other areas that might be impeding the development of compost from dairy sources. Thanks.
Thanks. Just a couple notes on the economic analysis and the scrape piece in particular. We tried to take a fairly conservative approach in costs for our economic analysis, and certainly people may disagree, and again, I welcome your insights and suggestions on numbers and references. In addition to graciously or generously citing your study, we also funded some research at UC Davis, and we cited their study quite a lot as well. We asked them to look at the costs of scrape as well as other things, and there isn't a lot of information out there, but they did provide an estimate, and what we did was essentially double the cost estimate in that study and here, and again, including a scrape conversion before the other elements of a digester or other elements of the project that might happen. Hopefully it's a conservative approach on the costs. We think it also could be part of a broader strategy to provide additional water quality, air quality, and climate benefits. You get more renewable gas coming out of that. We think it can improve nutrient management on the farm. But certainly we need a lot more research on that. We're committed to supporting research to help identify costs, benefits, performance associated with various strategies to reduce methane. Our approach is not to say it's all digesters or nothing. We included more discussion of pasture conversion, for example, as well in this proposal in this proposed strategy compared to the earlier draft. That's one where the costs are sort of uncertain as well. But we do know, that if you don't put manure in water, you're not going to produce methane. So we don't think we necessarily need to do more research before we commit to reducing emissions from the sector, but certainly we are committed to more research to help understand the costs and benefits, and that'll feed into any subsequent analysis pursuant to the regulation where we would add more specifics and do a macroeconomic analysis, I expect, and all sorts of other things associated with the strategy. Thanks.
Good morning, Alex Jackson with NRDC, and first, thank you to staff for their hard work as evidenced by the strong strategy and proposal. We think the goals are appropriately ambitious but achievable, and we think it's the right approach with a mix of incentives, performance-based standards, and reach goals to help drive innovation and technology. I certainly want to align my organization behind some of the big ticket items on organic diversion and the dairy manure methane targets, but on my comments today I want to focus on the HFC part of the strategy document, and in particular on three aspects of the proposal. We know HFC emissions are a huge growing source both in California and around the world. We must take aggressive action now if we're going to hit our 2030 goals as put out by Governor Brown. So for the proposal itself, and I guess more by FYI, in case there's other members of the legislature watching, I'm sure they're paying close attention to this workshop. We are supporting strongly Governor Brown's budget proposal for $20 million in incentive money for commercial refrigeration systems. We see those incentives as critical as commercial refrigeration systems are leak prone and therefore particularly harmful, and that financial support could go a long way towards helping California reach the proposed GWP cutoff of 150 in 2020, and a much deeper cut than what EPA has required under the SNAP program, but one that we think, again, is both achievable and with huge benefits. Second, we are certainly encouraged by the recent developments in the Montreal Protocol discussions, but we do encourage ARB to continue to develop an HFC supply phase down in case the agreement that is ultimately reached is not ambitious enough or does not require reductions on a timeline that's going to be necessary for California to hit its own goals. We need that plan on standby, and I think we also see it as an opportunity to help press the international community as these negotiations are ongoing toward a stricter timeline for developed countries. And then second, apart from the phase down, we are strongly encouraging ARB to continue moving forward with individual measures. Apart from that, in particular, we'd like to see ARB proceed with sales bans on very high GWP refrigerants, those with a GWP above 2,500, and on new air conditioning equipment with high GWP refrigerants, in particular banning the sale of new air conditioning equipment with GWPs above 750 in 2021, which we believe will put climate-friendly and more efficient systems into the hands of home and building owners as soon as they are available. And relatedly, to support the proposal to limit the GWP of home refrigerators and freezers starting in 2021, we believe a less than 150 GWP requirement will help push national manufacturers to adopt low GWP refrigerants like isobutane rather than less efficient, higher GWP blends that are still permitted by EPA. And accordingly, we see that area as particularly ripe for California leadership to have an outsized impact well in line with all of our climate programs to date. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Shelley Sullivan. I'm with the Climate Change Policy Coalition, and today we have some comments that are just more on the broad level of the strategy. Short-lived climate pollutants are already regulated. Black carbon under criteria pollutants and all the others are covered under AB 32. We don't have, at this point, a technical basis for these goals that are set in the strategy, and we're wondering if a study has been conducted that shows a course of action. And finally, overlapping these caps will not make any environmental improvements as emissions shift from double cap sectors to cap sectors, which ultimately will increase costs to the state of California. So we urge you to take a look at these thoughts and comments as you move forward.
Good morning. My name is Kareem Amran, and I'm with the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, HRI. HRI is the trade association representing manufacturers of air conditioning, refrigeration, and heating equipment. HRI in the industry has been very active researching alternative refrigerants. We've tested over 60 of them over the last 5 years. And the research is telling us that most of the refrigerants are going to be flammable or mildly flammable. That's a new ballgame for the industry. Industry has stayed away from flammable refrigerants, and that's going to require a redesign of equipment. And as Kevin Messmer just mentioned about codes and standards, those will have also to be amended to address these alternative refrigerants. I'm glad that you are mentioning the joint petition that the HRI and NRDC filed with the EPA on chillers, calling on the delisting of several refrigerants. But the petition calls for 2025 as the effective date and not 2021. So you should be aware that this date was not pulled out of the blue. It was really discussed and really takes into account the time that's going to be needed to redesign equipment. And most importantly, to modify those codes and standards to address those flammable refrigerants. California, for example, used the Uniform Mechanical Code today, which today does not really severely restrict the use of flammable refrigerants. So we are doing, in fact, additional research. HRI committed $1 million. ASHRAE committed also $1 million to really speed up the development of new codes to introduce those new alternative refrigerants. But again, that's going to require time, and the dates that you are proposing today are too aggressive in our opinion and must be pushed back a little bit. Thank you.
I have a clarifying question. This is Glenn Gallagher, CARB. 2025, you say, would be a reasonable start date for lower global warming potential air conditioning. Is the refrigeration at 2020, in your view, still reasonable?
No, it's not, and for the same reasons. I mean, there are a lot of things. First of all, we haven't talked about this, but most of those alternative refrigerants, let's say for the air conditioning sector, are not even SNAP approved today. So that's going to be something that EPA will have to address, and EPA has not addressed them because, of course, of the safety standards and codes. It needs to happen. But for commercial refrigeration, we're in the same situation, and there's also a trade-off between refrigerants and energy efficiency. There are regulations, DOE regulations in place that we need to keep in mind because some of the alternative refrigerants might not be as efficient as the one that are used today. So that's something that you should take into consideration.
Good morning. Bill McGavin with the Coalition for Clean Air. The urgency of the climate crisis demands that we reduce these short-lived climate pollutants rapidly, and that's really the only way that we can buy the time to reduce the carbon buildup in the atmosphere and stave off potentially catastrophic climate change. And California can make an enormous contribution by showing the rest of the country and the rest of the world how to do this. So we support the report and urge you to implement it as soon as possible. And the urgency of the crisis also very much confirms your choice to use the 20-year GWP values. That's really the only time frame that makes sense. There's been some talk about ARB's authority. We think it's clear that AB 32 charges ARB with reducing greenhouse pollution, and some of these short-lived pollutants are also air pollutants at ground level, and the Clean Air Act charges you with reducing those. So we would say that ARB is not only authorized but obligated to reduce these sources of pollution. In some of the specific areas, we're looking forward to the release of the Freight Action Plan. Attaining our targets will require a transformation of the way we move goods in this state. And we also agree with the statement that Ryan made earlier about the potential for taking biogas and putting that directly into the transportation sector. We would say specifically into the heaviest long-haul trucks to help to clean up the emissions from that sector. We also support the proposal for reducing emissions from wood smoke, as well as the organics diversion is an important piece that the state's been working on for a long time, along with the other measures. And I would just conclude by saying that reaching these targets is going to require a combination of regulation and incentives. That's what's worked for the past in driving down pollution, and that's what will work in the future. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Delorier. I'm the program manager for the California Wastewater Climate Change Group, the members of which represent the state's wastewater community perspectives on climate change. And we just really want to applaud you with all the hard work that you've done on the proposed short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy, and strongly support the inclusion of the wastewater sector as part of the solution to reducing methane. While the municipal wastewater sector is not a major methane emitter, it does provide a pathway for significant methane reductions and capable of accepting upwards of 20 or 75% of the diverted food waste and fat soils and grease from landfills, and co-digesting that material with sewage sludge, as Julia Levin had mentioned earlier. The products, as you acknowledged in the actual reduction strategy, being biogas and biosolids are the digested material, can be beneficially used, all of it. Biogas for energy production, or as you had included in the economic analysis, processed into a transportation fuel. And the biosolids are digested material as a soil amendment, which can offset synthetic fertilizer use and production, but also sequester carbon in the soil below. It can offset irrigation demand because of the moisture content and increase overall crop yield, and there are studies that we can provide for that as well. We do see the wastewater sector being a partner with the waste sector to accomplish this. The waste sector, for example, providing the pre-processing of the diverted organics into a digestible form, that can also occur on site at a wastewater treatment facility, but we do see this as a good partnering because infrastructure is in place at the wastewater treatment facilities and some of the necessary permits are in place. as well as some trained staff, the municipal wastewater sector is uniquely positioned to help the state achieve not only its ambitious diversion goals by 2025, but renewable energy goals beyond 2020, reduction in carbon intensity of transportation fuel, as you have estimated in your analysis, methane reduction goals, as well as contribute toward the Healthy Soils Initiative through land application of biosolids or the digested material. We will submit a comment letter providing the full set of our comments, as well as provide detailed feedback on the economic analysis with specific references as you requested for costs. And we look forward to continued discussions with you.
Good morning. My name is Martha Davis. I'm with the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, and we provide wastewater services as well as other water services to the 850,000 people located over in the west end of San Bernardino County. You've already heard from a number of people. Thank you for including and recognizing the role that wastewater agencies can play in helping achieve the organic diversions goals within the short-lived climate pollutants plan. Quite frankly, we should also thank you for asking us to do the analysis, because I don't think we recognized how much existing anaerobic digestion capacity we had for taking in food waste and fats, oils, and grease. So it was a learning exercise for us as we gave those numbers to you. The point I want to make today is to say thank you for recognizing and including the importance of a regional approach for dealing with the fats, oils, and grease and waste diversion. It's something that from the standpoint of cost effectively and very quickly advancing your goals for achieving the organics diversion, we need the cooperation from the cities, the wastewater agencies, and of course the waste haulers as part of making that happen. So we are a sponsor of SB 970, which is one avenue for providing incentives for that kind of regional cooperation. We have some other ideas on how this might be advanced, and we'd like to work with you in the coming weeks to brief you on some ideas on that front. So thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. I'm Will Barrett with the American Lung Association in California. First, I want to thank all of the staff and partners for the thorough document, and we do support the targets as a strong health and climate tool going forward. In fact, there were over 30 health and medical organizations who supported these same targets as outlined in Senator Lara's legislation now going through the Capitol. We applaud overall the discussion of the health benefits already achieved through California's existing authority and regulations on mobile source strategies through the freight program and others, and look forward to the continued success of these programs as will be laid out in the mobile source strategy and the sustainable freight program later this month. On the residential wood burning program, we thought the program did a good job of outlining the growing health and climate challenges related to this source. The Lung Association is strongly supporting the governor's $40 billion budget proposal to provide more incentive to get cleaner options out there. We do think that the strategy could put more focus on elimination of wood burning altogether wherever possible through incentives that prioritize non-combustion options wherever possible. And we've been working with some of the air districts. We'll continue to work with some of the air districts as that effort goes forward to really clean up that important source of local health impact and global health impact. Finally, we appreciate the health assessment discussion in the document. Look forward to seeing the full assessment that comes forward as this process goes forward, and ultimately just appreciate ARB and partner agencies tackling this critical climate and health area of focus because we know that these go hand in hand, and we need to continue everything we can do to reduce these sources. Thank you.
Good morning, Jamie Miner for Land O'Lakes Dairies. First, I want to start out thanking you for your commitment to look into the issue of leakage out of state before developing a plan. I think we can all agree that California has the highest standards for dairy with the highest antibiotic, organics, and environmental regulations in the country. Our industry is committed to reducing methane emissions, and we want to further continue to do so. However, due to the volatile nature of how dairy pricing is regulated through CDFA, we'd like to see a more carrot approach as opposed to a stick approach. A stick approach will only set the industry up for failure and drive more dairy farmers and jobs out of the state. So thank you for your consideration.
Laura Ferrante with Recology. Recology operates 10 organics processing facilities on the West Coast, and last year composted over 1 billion pounds of yard trimmings and food waste. And support of the organics diversion goals and the proposed strategy. And specifically, we also support the adoption of regulations to prohibit disposal of organics in landfills. To facilitate achieving these objectives, we recommend that ARB and CalRecycle focus on incentivizing local jurisdictions to create urban areas, streamlining permitting processes for the development of new and expanded facilities, and also developing additional processing outlets for low-grade wood waste. This material has low composting value, and non-disposal options are becoming increasingly limited as biomass facilities close, and shortly this material will no longer be able to be used for alternative daily cover. Options, our non-disposal options are dwindling. We thank you very much for all your efforts thus far and look forward to ongoing discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd be interested to learn more, perhaps in your comments or separately, on how you think we can incentivize local jurisdictions on a regional approach. Thanks.
Thanks for that comment. I just want to jump in and say that I think that this is, the point is well taken that getting the capacity to manage these organics is going to be a challenge, and something that ARB has recognized through this process, as had CalRecycle. And so using the AB 1045 process as sort of a launching point for having that both interagency conversation and a conversation with local jurisdictions about how to enable the siting and permitting of new facilities, I think is a really important piece of that. It's recognized as a challenge, and we're hoping to work with everybody on that. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Graham Noyes. I'm here on behalf of Sierra Energy, a client, and want to start by emphasizing our strong support for the work that's been done. We've been participating from the beginning, from the concept paper with comments specific to Sierra Energy, and will continue to do so. But what I wanted to talk about today in person was really the opportunities that are presented by methane in particular. And Sierra Energy is just one of the companies that essentially sees these methane opportunities. Methane within the short-lived climate pollutants is interesting because, of course, once it's cleaned up to methane, it's natural gas, and it's valuable as an energy fuel and a transportation fuel, but it's competing with very low-cost natural gas otherwise. So everything that is done to essentially commercialize the use of methane provides opportunities for businesses like Sierra Energy to go out there and harness the power of essentially this fuel and find ways to commercialize it. And multiple companies and technologies are in the process of being scaled up and commercialized right now. So it's sort of an exciting time out there in methane space. Want to emphasize Sierra Energy is a member of the Bioenergy Association of California and is supportive of all the comments that Julia provided here. My comments are really focused in more specifically on the more unique thing that Sierra Energy does, which is to deal with the very difficult post-separated municipal solid waste, so material that's gone through all the recycling and recovery actions that can occur, the leftovers, so to speak, that are otherwise going to landfill. Sierra has a fast ox gasification technology that can essentially take all of those streams, gasify them, and separate out the methane for power generation. They did their first round of development locally here at McClellan, and they're now working at Fort Hunter Liggett on a zero waste project that's going to help eliminate waste at the base, generate power from waste at the facility, and they're ultimately looking to go to Fischer-Tropsch diesel fuel for transportation use and also hydrogen. Some very exciting applications there. They're looking forward to continued scale up and want to focus on the opportunities that are available with the post-separated municipal solid waste, including essentially contaminated organics, things that go to the landfill after all the separation actions have occurred, and recognizing that there are additional opportunities. I think through the evolution of this report, we've seen more recognition around that. There are other opportunities with what's going on with Cal Recycle, AB 901, to sort of provide more transparency and insight into what actually happens with the waste. Particularly the leakage issue can be potentially addressed there. And for all of these facilities, to the extent that we see how much methane is being released, and also create value in terms of the environmental attributes, as Ryan mentioned. The LCFS program is very strong on that end. Cal Recycle and the Air Resources Board now have sort of fuel development programs in the works. All of those things are really driving down the industry, driving down the costs at the industry and enabling these fuels to succeed out there. Want to encourage across the agencies continued breakdown of the barriers to waste to energy and waste to fuels. And we're going to be seeing shortly a UC Berkeley report called Wasting Opportunities, looking at some policy recommendations to move California forward on basically tapping into some of those contaminated organics. And so we really just wanted to speak out in support of this overall program and plan and emphasize the additional business opportunities that are out there. And as these business opportunities gather steam, they are self-perpetuating. The one question I wanted to put to Ryan, this report obviously takes the 20-year global warming potential approach. We've seen now, and I don't want to pick on Evan and Cal Recycle, but we just saw from Cal Recycle the a 100-year convention on methane, and certainly would agree with the prior comment that we're really on a 20-year cycle here in terms of needing to succeed in the fight against climate change. Is there a reason for not moving more broadly to a 20-year GWP approach?
I blame Evan, but yeah, I mean, you know, we have a lot of regulatory efforts underway, obviously, with a lot of money on the line and momentum and markets developed around them, and that's not something we can just change, nor do we intend to. This is, you know, a planning document. We thought for the sake of this planning document and discussion that 20 years was appropriate to frame the issue. I expect to the extent regulations were to come from this, that you would see 100-year accounting at least included, and a comparison of costs in 100-year as well as 20-year. But that's, you know, something we would figure out in the future. At this point, there's no plan to switch any of our programs from 100-year accounting. But for the sake of this planning effort, we thought it was appropriate to, you know, frame things in that context.
Well, just then provide the comment that I think that deserves a second look, at least proactively, given the context we're in. Thank you.
Hi, Jeannie Merrill with the California Climate and Agriculture Network, and we really appreciate that this plan does a more robust job than the previous version in terms of talking about the potential for non-digester management strategies to reduce emissions in the dairy sector. We have a very diverse dairy sector in California, but we want to just highlight the need for a more robust discussion and plan for non-digester dairy strategies that reduce methane emissions, including in that plan a clear investment in the technical expertise, the research, and the ability to implement dry manure, compost, pasture-based systems. We've really, at the state level, very much focused on digesters, which is certainly appropriate, but if we're going to have a robust, diverse strategy, we need to have that technical expertise at the state level as well as the ability on the ground to make those other dairy management strategies feasible for those operations for whom digesters simply will not work. Thanks.
Good morning, Stacy Heaton with the Rural County Representatives of California, and I'd like to speak to two specific items in the proposed plan. First being the goals and regulations proposed for landfills and organics disposal. We have been working with another group or with a group of other organizations and working with staff on this to try to work through some of the issues there, but we do believe it is an extremely aggressive goal and one that we believe cannot be met without significant investment from the state that, no disrespect meant, but that your agencies can neither provide nor guarantee. And this is something that we are, of course, willing to keep working on, but at this point, we don't see a clear path to meeting those goals through the infrastructure that's currently available or affordable in our landfill structure. So I just wanted to make that comment. And then on the forest health side, we appreciate all the work that's been done in this proposed plan on the forest carbon aspect. RCRC has a seat on the Forest Climate Action Team. We're also very active members in the Tree Mortality Task Force. So we're very well versed in what's going on out there in the forest right now and the need for a holistic approach to forest management. The carbon sequestration potential that we're losing every single year to wildfire, we're expecting this year to be perhaps one of our worst ever due to all those lovely red trees that are out there in our counties right now. And if you haven't seen the pictures, just look them up online. It's pretty depressing. And so we appreciate all the work that's been done in this plan on forest health. We've made a commitment to continue our participation in EPCAT to help the state and federal agencies work through this and work through this forest carbon plan. We do believe, however, and I want to echo some comments made by Julia Levin earlier, that setting goals for forest carbon reductions is important. And the reason it's important is because those folks in the dome over there, if you've been paying attention to some of the conversations that have been going on with regards to cap and trade funding and that spending and where they want to place it, it hasn't exactly been encouraging as of yet for some of these sectors we're talking about today. And setting some goals for forest health in particular would maybe help get some of those funds and make a better argument to get some of those funds funneled that way, because we don't have a lot of time to help our forests in the current state that they're in. And I'd also like to echo one more comment that Julia made earlier regarding the PUC and their here today, and a lot of these issues and a lot of these meetings, they are not at the table as much as we would like them to be either. It's something we hear from our board a lot. We talk about biomass, biomethane, biogas. It's something that comes up in a lot of these areas, and it's something that I hear of. Where is the PUC? So we know that's not your fault. You don't have any control over it, but we just urge you to continue to reach out to them, to try to engage them and get them involved. And we, from our perspective, will continue to do the same. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Nick Lapis with the environmental group Californians Against Waste. We wanted to first just commend the staff on the tremendous effort you've put into this document and the previous versions of this draft. We are strongly supporting many different components of this plan, but specifically the organic waste diversion targets. We do think they are ambitious, but they are achievable. We've seen communities in California and elsewhere that have achieved similar targets, and that seems like the right level to set your benchmarks. I did want to make comments on a couple things that are specific to this most recent draft. One is on the food waste recovery. We really appreciate that you have set a goal for recovering food waste for the first time, I believe, in this draft or in this document or for CalRecycle. It's important to have goals because we don't really achieve what we don't quantify. But we still need specific strategies to actually accomplish the goals. Obviously, this area is not an area of expertise for either CalRecycle or ARB, and so I recommend that we bring in the folks who have been doing food recovery work for the last few decades in their organizations all over the state and really talk to them to find out what strategies could we implement to help achieve the goals in the plan. Are the goals that you guys set appropriate, or should they be higher or lower, or are we looking at the wrong metrics altogether? I would also urge you not to foreclose on landfill emission reductions, direct landfill emission reductions. It seems like with every version of this document, there's a smaller and smaller emphasis placed on adopting a phase 2 regulation for landfill emissions. We know that even if we were to meet the goals, the 90% by 2025, we would still have landfills emitting methane for decades into the future, if not centuries. Also, this maybe more of a technical comment that maybe I should follow up offline, but it seems like there might be some flaws in the economic analysis, especially with regards to scenario 3, the composting scenario. Two major flaws that jumped out at me were you don't attribute any revenue to the sale of compost, which obviously is a big part of the revenue stream for any composting facility. And the second one that's a little more nuanced is that you look at statewide current tip fees for composting as the projected revenue, but you're looking at green waste facilities. And so when you say that their tip fees of $45 a ton would apply to these new facilities, that's sort of an apples and oranges comparison with the food waste facilities. So maybe the tip fee revenue should be based on existing food waste facilities, not green waste. And finally, I would recommend that you and us as a community take the time to learn from the communities in California that have implemented food waste programs. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We've done this in many different cities around the state, especially in the Bay Area. And I think it would be beneficial for you to spend a couple days meeting with the local governments in the Bay Area to hear what has worked, what hasn't worked in terms of generator outreach, in terms of the balance of mandates and incentives, in terms of education, et cetera. So that way we're not recreating a statewide program out of whole cloth. Thank you.
Thanks. Just a couple comments on that. One, I think CDFA probably has a role to play in a food rescue program as well. And maybe that's broader than just methane reductions from waste. But I agree that we need to really think this through and that we haven't necessarily done that entirely yet. But I'm excited about the opportunity to do so. I want to give Emily I don't know if you have any comments on the waste, on the economic analysis, but I wanted to give her a chance to.
Yeah, I think on the issue of the lack of revenue from compost, we did try to be quite conservative, and we do recognize that there are, California's a big state, and it really does, the options vary by geographic location quite a bit. So that was one simplifying assumption we made that we felt was being rather conservative. Similarly, with in regards to the tip fee, it was a simplifying assumption where, we're doing sort of a statewide balance. And so we did just take the $45. If you do, this was a simplifying assumption. We could do something much more granular, which will come as sort of regulations come out of this, this plan. But if you do have specific recommendations for different values, we'd be happy to hear that.
Hi. Sorry, one last thing. I just wanted to mention about food waste. I think your points are well taken, and I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned. This is not an area where the state has a huge amount of expertise because so much of the work is going on at the local level. And I think that to the extent that we, Cal Recycle or CDFA or others are, and ARB are getting engaged in this in a more deep fashion, that making sure that the expertise that was developed on the ground is drawn on heavily is really important. The Cal Recycle has held one workshop and is hosting another workshop to look at setting grant criteria for a $10 million pot of money, grant money that will be available to support food waste prevention efforts. The first workshop was down in San Diego, and the next one I believe is up here, and I don't know the date off the top of my head. Nick, you may know better than I do. That sounds right. May 26th sounds close to right, but I would check it up online. And that's been our first effort to try and draw in some of that expertise. But I think having meetings at a local level and drawing people in, and also, Jenny and I have talked a little bit about this, but making sure that CDFA has done a ton of great work on this, and making sure that we're all collaborating on every piece from the farm all the way to the consumer to reduce food waste is an important piece of that too. So it's all well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Yes, we've had some conversations. CDFA has had, we have a roundtable for food waste in Fresno, and then we also do a lot of work in our animal feed division on food waste and food rescue for animal feed as well.
All right, Mick Scavarla, talking on behalf of United Technologies and the Carrier Corporation specifically. wanted to address just a few things. We commend ARB for following the Montreal Protocol process. We know that that's quite an effort, and based on the comments earlier from Ryan, there is progress being made, and there is an expected composite draft being put together now, which is a big step forward from the last meeting. And we hope that ARB's has the patience to follow that process through and perhaps adapt and kind of parity what's going on there before creating one-off regulations in the state. Additionally, we don't agree with the comments about energy efficiency benefits to low GWP refrigerants. From our research, the opposite's quite true, and in fact, it's a negative environmental benefit or detriment, I guess would be more appropriate. Also, AHRI made mention of the differing timelines, and we would hope that in a finalized draft, the ARB would look more closely at SNAP and DOE processes and try to come out in line with that, so that California doesn't have a a temporary product shifting for a 2-year, 3-year period, which would especially on low volume products at a short time frame like that, in difference of regulatory processes between national and state would cause that come at a great expense to the state of California and the consumers in the state of California for a 24-month period of time, and that's just not at the federal level and internationally. So we hope that ARB's willing to follow these processes through, continue to participate and be a part of that. Also, the mention of the flammability of the low GWP things. Pilots going on, everyone's doing the research. It's very important that that we get that right. Risk to the worker and the consumer is too great to move forward on just that side. We have to ensure safety. All the companies that are members of AHRI and Carrier Corp, that's the utmost importance. We can't put something that hasn't been fully vetted in terms of the codes, that might be flammable or cause risk of fire on houses and buildings. It's just not acceptable, and we hope that ARB recognizes that and is willing to continue along the process with the Montreal Protocol update, as well as the way DOE and SNAP are going.
Thank you, Michael Shaw, California Manufacturers Technology Association. And I think the first point I wanted to address is the issue of authority. Under AB 32, it does, as I think Ryan said, talk about continue reductions, but I think it's very clear in the language. It talks about maintaining and continuing the current reductions, not necessarily going beyond that. That is the subject of, obviously, legislation that's ongoing. Governor's issued executive orders. However, recently, Legislative Council, as well as the LAO, have both opined on the issue and both stated very clearly that the authority does not exist beyond 2020 to continue reducing emissions in this area. That is something that is being, worked on in the legislation already. So, there is a discussion going on with regard to that, but the authority doesn't exist yet at this point on those issues. However, we do know that a number of the gases included on this list are already being regulated under other regulations regarding air quality, not for GHG purposes. A couple of points is specific to the draft baseline year confusion, I think, is a concern that the industry has. Using 2013 versus 1990, which is the general standard that we're using across the board in California regulations on law, is something that we think creates confusion. Doesn't necessarily translate well to value the carbon in which 1990 levels more accurately reflect. So we encourage uniformity across that. It makes it easier for all of us to continue working on that. Also, the inclusion or creation of a cap essentially within a cap, we think also complicates and adds to the cost of compliance in California. We have a 1990 cap. Companies, facilities that are, hit the threshold, fall under that cap, are required to meet emissions reductions accordingly. And creating a separate cap on these specific gases, is another compliance headache that they're going to have to deal with. And administratively, these add to the cost of doing so. And while we could, include in a larger discussion of post-2020 policy, a uniform cap would make a lot more sense from our perspective. Additionally, this cost and confusion, contributes to leakage risk. We do know that a number of these industries are looking at or actively making decisions to locate outside of California. We lose control of those emissions at that point. We also lose the economic benefit of those jobs. And that is a concern because those are generally well-paying jobs, especially in the manufacturing industry. So we would encourage you to look very closely at that. A number of efforts have been undertaken to limit leakage. However, we would point out, say in the case of the PUC's emissions intensive trade exposed industry assistance credit, that revenue has yet to be delivered to those entities. It is still out there, and we are told that there's no ETA as to when that will ultimately be delivered to those industries. So there is an effort to address the issues of leakage, but some of those efforts have yet to get off the ground. And here we are several years into the program. And finally, as far as the F-gas or HFCs go, it's been said before, the concerns about energy efficiency and safety issues. We also encourage you to look very closely as industry is already undertaking efforts to look at alternatives in this area and continue to work with them to identify those options that they think best work that could be most easily or most readily achieved in terms of transition. We know that generally if refrigeration appliances and other things like that do not turn over very frequently as a resident. I've had the same fridge since I bought my first house 13 years ago, looking at alternatives now. But the point is these are things that don't turn over very frequently. So to the degree we can provide industry the opportunity to very quickly make that transition to a safe and energy efficient product or say alternative, I think that would be a benefit to the state as well.
Thanks. Can I ask one question? This is the second time now we've heard comments on double capping, and I'm just not entirely sure what you mean by that. Most of the sectors that we're discussing here aren't in our cap and trade program, and we're not talking about creating a new cap. We're talking about goals and some specific measures. But can you just, am I misunderstanding something, or can you elaborate on that?
We're creating an additional cap. Maybe the best way to describe it is an additional cap regarding GHG gases in California, and that is where we think the complication, the additional cost and compliance issues would be created.
So specific targets for specific gases is the concern here?
Yes, well, rather than incorporating it into the existing cap and trade program that we already have.
Boggy with the California Chamber of Commerce. We too have some of the similar concerns already raised. One of our concerns is overlapping regulations. All of the gases that we're discussing in this strategy are already regulated directly or indirectly. Methane and F-gases are included in AB 32. This is going to be a new strategy outside of that, which will lead to additional regulations, increased costs for businesses. A concern rising out of that will be the limiting of offset potential for those. There are offsets available for dairy digesters at this point. It was addressed earlier. Offsets at this point are not widely used to the point that they could be, and eliminating offsets further is only going to create more pressure on the market there. All in all, we are also concerned with leakage risks for all of these industries in the state. I know that you guys have made reference to addressing that. We appreciate that, but there is still concerns for leakage. And we will provide more comments in detail in writing. Thank you.
Good morning, Abby Helprin from the Pacific Forest Trust. I wanted to comment today about black carbon and forests, and I want to thank you for recognizing the difference between forest-related emissions and other anthropogenic emissions of black carbon. I think that really appropriately recognizes the specific challenges we face with forest management. And looking at sort of the goals for fire on the landscape, I think you do a great job of recognizing that there is a role for prescribed fire, but we also need to recognize that there's a role for natural fires on the landscape to prevent returning to an era of fire suppression that has created the unnaturally dense and vulnerable forests we're faced with today. So looking at those goals of black carbon, I really encourage you to consider what the role of natural fire is on the landscape, and perhaps to take a historical perspective on what fire regimes were to help inform those levels of emissions. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, slightly still. My name is Rachel O'Brien with the Agricultural Council. The Ag Council is a member-supported organization advocating for more than 15,000 farmers across California and the state's 3 largest dairy cooperatives. California dairies have been an engaged partner throughout this process, and while they remain committed to doing their part, many concerns still persist. The proposed regulatory approach for dairies may have broad implications for the industry, and we have particular concerns about the loss of the GHG offset credits. The loss would have far-reaching implications for already strained dairy economics by eliminating a significant revenue stream. ARB should consider whether voluntary approaches could be more effective in achieving the reductions at facilities without causing leakage of California dairies to other states. The increasing number of burdensome and costly regulations, they are taking a toll. There are forces that are moving dairies out of this state, and we have had many members who themselves have questioned their future in California. There was earlier comment made that regulations with incentives has worked, and so we should continue to do that. And I do disagree. In 2015, farmers partnered with the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service to enter into voluntary contracts, matching agency incentives, and implying conservation practices for dust, for high polluting vehicle emission turnover to cleaner technologies. We have seen this to be possible without regulations. I want to state that progress can continue to be made, but only if we see a coordinated and well-planned effort and a long-term commitment to state funding. The short-lived climate pollutant plan acknowledges the need for a minimum of $500 million of incentive funding just to get started. Right now, that funding is not currently made available. The administration's 2016-2017 state budget, allocates, as I'm sure many of you know, just $35 million to dairy methane reduction projects. This is not enough. How is ARB going to, be expected to make significant progress on these goals when it's just providing 7% of the funds needed to get started? The bottom line is that there's a significant disconnect between the goals that are being set and the funding needed to achieve these goals. Thank you, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you. Dan Noble, Executive Director of the Association of Compost Producers. We are the California state chapter of the U.S. Composting Council. I don't know if any of you counted the words, how many times the word compost appeared in the strategy, but I did. It's about 4 dozen times. It was only eclipsed by the words manure or dairy manure, which appeared 90 times in the strategy. Food scraps appeared in the new proposed strategy 2 dozen times. So we're talking about various important elements of our food system, as well as our soil system, the whole ag system, and then the elephant that isn't in the room, our energy system, and the forest system. So I heard the term bandied about a little bit about holistic or whole systems management, but what I did not see in the strategy is an actual explication of what that could or should look like. In our letters so far on the various permutations of this strategy, we've proposed a whole systems approach to organics or renewable carbon management that's based on markets, which of course is the connection between the carbon compounds and the finances. And that includes both, feedstocks, manure, food scraps, green waste, forest products, the technologies, which vary from compost or simple chip and grind to animal feed, to food rescue, to chemicals and materials, and all the technologies that produce that, what we call a portfolio of bioproducts, of which soil amendments, the 4 big ones, are a key sector in that.
what I think is becoming an emerging renewable carbon economy here in California. And I think the short-lived climate pollutant strategy is actually forcing the hand, along with the 75% recycling goal, of moving from a non-renewable economy to a fully renewable carbon economy. And as we do that, when are we ever going to stop watching our carbon and our dollars invested in that? So it seems to me that we need to emerge a whole new economic model that is comprehensive and that takes into account all of the industries that are. Compost is just one little sector, and we're definitely not the wealthiest sector by far, but we are the ones, our constituency is returning the carbon to the soil. The other energy companies are returning the carbon to the atmosphere. And then, of course, if carbon's going to be sequestered from all the non-renewable carbon, that'll all go through the biosphere, through all the plants, both in the working lands, as well in the natural lands, and certainly the whole ag environment, as well as the urban forest. So there's everything in this strategy totally is a way of transforming our economy. So if we don't get the economic models right, we're not going to get the regulations right. We're not going to get the incentives right. So that entails a high degree of ongoing collaboration. And that was the other thing that we did not see in the strategy, was we saw there is a lot of collaboration going on right now, but there needs to be a formal process, maybe informal would be better because it would be more innovative, of collaborating with all of these industries in their various points and sectors. So there was mention of 1045. Of course, we were very keen on 1045, but that means the three, Cal EPA groups plus CDFA. And right now, I haven't seen where that's going. And they only mention one bioproduct in there in 1045, and that's compost. So we have a lot of collaborative work to do. And then when we talk about 901, in terms of tracking all of the waste side of these resources, that needs to be folded in too. So I think we have a huge opportunity, but a problem of getting all of these groups to collaborate together around some sort of umbrella model. And we've presented a model. I would love to have a discussion about that model, number one. And number two, how are we going to do the collaboration with all of these groups, all centered around carbon and global warming? So we proposed some ways forward to implementing the strategy along these lines, and those are in our comment letters, and will be so. Thank you for the opportunity. And by the way, I do want to echo the comments that this is prodigious work, and you've done a great job so far. It's just a huge job. Thank you.
Hello, I'm JP Cataviella. I'm here representing the Dairy Cares Coalition. I think it's useful to point out at the beginning of anything we say about California dairy how much progress has already been made. It's well established that the U.S. dairy industry has reduced its carbon footprint by 60% since peak emissions back in World War II. And that progress is continuing steadily. It's also recognized as a result of that type of progress that we are the leaders in emissions in the world, the most efficient producers of milk per amount of greenhouse gases released anywhere. North America was identified by the United Nations as the best place in terms of this type of performance. The United States beats Canada and Mexico, and California is ahead of the U.S. average on production efficiency. So we really are the best of the best already. That's not to say that more can't be done, and I'm certainly not here to say that today. It's just how we get there. Now, Dairy Cares has been committed to developing voluntary incentive strategies and working with the ARB and CDFA and other agencies for quite a long time to to get those types of programs in place, and we've had some success, and we hope to see more. We've also been working with you more recently to develop research programs that could lead us to other methods besides digesters that we hope will be cost effective and will recognize other impacts such as possible other environmental impacts from those strategies that we need to address, as well as animal health, worker safety, those types of issues. So we've been working closely on that. To summarize, we've submitted extensive comment letters last year in both opportunities, and what we've all said today, and I'd echo the comments of Rachel, others that have spoken. The goal that's been set is unrealistic. And the other part of that, and we didn't just say that before, we said a goal is not a strategy. A goal without a strategy is a recipe for failure. And so what we've asked, and unfortunately we don't think we've seen so far, is that ARB link the goals to how we're going to get there, and in particular with the funding commitments that have just been expressed to you again by Rachel. We think if you do that, the problem will fix itself. When you put the funding together with the goals, then you should be able to get a much more realistic goal to come out of that. We can't set a goal without knowing how much funding is going to be available. And we can't set additional goals until we get some of that research in for the less understood strategies. So that's what we hoped would have happened between, say, last September and now. It hasn't happened. It appears that instead, ARB is compensating for the lack of a strategy by setting a drop deadline some point in the future where you're just going to regulate. So everybody go grab as many incentives as you can, build a digester if you can, and then let the leakage begin around 2025. That's not a good plan. That's not a good plan for emissions reductions in California or the United States or the world, and it's certainly not a good plan for our dairy industry. So we hope that you'll reconsider that and start to link real funding commitments and a real plan to these goals so that we can have a more realistic outcome. Right now what we have, I think, is a plan that's going to lead to failure for the dairy industry and for ARB, and I don't think any of us really want that. The last thought I'll leave you with is we understand the urgency and we respect the urgency that ARB is approaching this problem. We need to point out, though, that especially in terms of methane, the emissions of California cows are a drop in the bucket. I will point out that there are 283 million cattle in India alone. That's 157 cattle for every dairy cow we have in California. And they are far less, they are decades behind us in production efficiency. So while we should proceed expeditiously to address this problem, we hope through voluntary incentive-based strategies, there is no reason for us to step on the accelerator so hard that we run our dairy industry into a wall and break it. So we hope you'll consider the context of the problem we're dealing with. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I appreciate your involvement throughout this process and discussion. I would like to once again invite you and Rachel and others who have commented on this to specifically provide specific examples and references on the economic analysis. We did our best to try to lay out sort of the type of incentives or potential costs or economic benefits to the industry that could exist. Certainly there's a lot of uncertainty.
Thanks for that, and of course we're planning to submit extensive comments on that.
Yes, hi, my name is Chris Trott. I'm here representing Zanka Recycling, which is a recycling company in the South Bay area and in Sacramento, in Yolo County as well. If you are not familiar with Zanka, they've been committed to recycling organics from landfills since 1985. And right now, their overall recycling rate is 86% in all the waste that they collect and comes into their operations. They compost 1,200 tons per day of green and food waste and anaerobic digester digestate at their Z-Best facility in Gilroy, 500 tons per day of food waste at their zero waste AD plant in San Jose, and also another 500 tons per day of wood waste that they make into boiler fuel, mulch, and landscape materials. Um, yeah, that's an introduction to them. And I just want to say that Zanker Recycling is very supportive of the goal of removing organics from landfill by 2025 and 2030. We fully echo Mr. Edgar's comments from the California Composting Coalition, so I won't repeat those. But one thing we'd like to say about removing the organics from landfill, specifically food waste, the use of unused capacity at the wastewater treatment facilities is a great idea. It's really interesting, but it's probably going to be a little more difficult than what people imagine, because Zanker's experience with food waste is there's a whole lot of contaminants that you have to remove before you can make it usable for anaerobic digester. So that's just one comment that you might want to look into a little bit more. But also we support the incentives for more composting and more anaerobic digester facilities. And we're really happy to hear what you said. I believe it was you, Ryan. It said you recognize the importance of streamlining the regulations of and the costs of actually hooking up to biomethane operations to pipelines. That's super important. It's a barrier right now. AD processing of food waste to make electricity alone doesn't make money. But if it can be made into some kind of transportation fuel with those credits that the strategy recognizes, that's critical. And then there also needs to be streamlining of regulatory barriers to siting new and expanding existing facilities, because it's one thing if Sacramento says, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to create all these more facilities, but then when you get to the local level, trying to site one of these things may take 15 years, you know. There's going to need to be more capital in the forms of grants and low interest loans, and we think it's more than $100 million a year. And we also think that increased use of GGRF money is warranted, because investments, according to Legislative Analyst Office analysis that was put out last week, green and food waste recycling infrastructure is very cost effective when trying to remove carbon. $4 to $9 per ton of CO2e removed, which, I mean, that's like the lowest in their whole list. So it's a great use of GGRF funds. And we also see a need, if you're gonna take all these organics out of the landfill, there's a definite need for incentives for farmers to use more compost, because there's you know, there's a large demand for the compost that Zanker produces from its operation today. But we also see, if you're going to take 16 million more tons out of the landfill, that there's going to be an abundance of compost. And if there isn't an increased market, then yeah, there's a crash coming. We're going to hit a wall. And then finally, only one person really talked about this, but continued operation of bioenergy facilities as a large-scale year-round market for clean C&D and tree service waste, that's critical. Because at least in Central California, the other wood materials can't just be absorbed by the landscape and mulch markets that exist today. One thing that, just continuing on that in the report, it talks about, as an example, the products that are produced from San Diego's green waste programs of, you know, all the mulch and chips and everything. We just want to say that at least in Central California, in the markets that Zanker operates in, there's great and developing markets for mulch and landscape products, but unlike Southern California, they're seasonal markets. And the Cal Recycle permits limit storage times for processed and unprocessed material at green waste and chip and grind facilities. So there's a need for a year-round market for this material, and the bioenergy plants, the bioenergy market is really important for that, to be able to move that during the off-season. So we just want to suggest that, you think about the impacts of the 9 bioenergy plants that closed in California in the past 2 years, which eliminated a market for nearly 1 million tons of urban wood waste, recycled wood waste, and then possibly 7 more plants that are likely to close before the end of this year, which will put maybe another almost 1 million tons back out into a market with no home. So the mulch and landscape markets in much of California are just not developed enough to take the almost 2 million tons that is not used in bioenergy plants that closed the last 2 years, much less the 2 million tons that the strategy projects is going to come out of landfills to chip and grind facilities in the next few years. So that it's really important that these bioenergy plants stay open. There's not going to be a place for this material to go, so it will continue to go in the landfill, or in rural areas it's going to be open burned illegally, no doubt about it. So lastly, on the black carbon reduction, Zanker doesn't really get involved in open burning very much, but we just want to say that it's not just the chip and grind facilities that are going to suffer with markets for bioenergy plants shutting down. The 2013 black carbon inventory that you show with 3% anthropogenic black carbon from ag burning, this is only because the previous 20 years all of the orchard waste and everything has been going to the bioenergy facilities. So we're suggesting that maybe you need to reevaluate that your carbon inventory is probably not right. And there's going to be a dramatic increase in ag open burning here in the next few years, including the San Joaquin Valley. So, so we need the bioenergy plants for that too. So we just suggest 3 things here that you look at black carbon from ag burn emissions from like the early 1980s and assume that could be what's going to happen here if all these biomass plants shut down and the potential impact on your inventory in 2030. And then just recognize also that if there is an increase in ag open burning, it's not just black carbon that we're going to have in the air, it's the other criteria pollutants that get emitted as well. And so we suggest even the consideration of using GGRF funds in the state for keeping the bioenergy plants open just for a control on black carbon. So thank you much, and we'll be submitting our comments in writing.
Good afternoon. Jack Macy with the City and County of San Francisco, Department of the Environment. I'm here to express our strong support for your proposal to ban organics from the landfill. We think that this is a critically needed and ambitious vision and plan. And, based on our experience, we can say that this is something that makes sense. San Francisco has long supported the diversion of organics and various climate measures. We are now, it's been 20 years since we started composting food scraps with our partner Recology, and we have implemented programs throughout the city of San Francisco and made them mandatory. After driving them with rate incentives and a lot of outreach and assistance, we actually made them mandatory, and that really kind of leapt us to a much higher level of recovery. We now have that program serving all generators in the city, so like 99% of all properties actually have the service. And we're diverting on the order of 700 tons, over 400 tons a day of which are actual food scraps, given our density. And this has been a great success. It's helped us reduce landfilling by over half. It's been part of our climate. We have ambitious climate emission goals, and it's helped contribute to us reducing climate emissions by 25% below 1990 levels, and we're going towards 40% by 2025 and beyond. So all of these measures have made a big difference, and it's required good planning and implementation on the collection end. It's required facilities to have those. So your plan identifies, I think, some key challenges and strategies that have to be implemented. And the challenges, as I see them, is increasingly stringent regulations, particularly around water and air. So better coordination of that would I think really help, and then critical funding for that infrastructure, both in the processing end, but also on the collection end. So based on this experience, we really, again, applaud this plan and are happy to share with you our experience and help sort of flesh out the details going forward. Thank you.
I just wanted to chime in and say thank you for that, and I do think that understanding successes, I said it before, but understanding successes, in cities big and small is going to be really important moving ahead and having success and meeting these targets. So we look forward to those conversations.
Endeavor to be brief. Katrina Robinson, on behalf of John Wick, co-founder of the Marin Carbon Project and the Global Composting Initiative. We support the targets in the plan, particularly the organics diversion requirements from landfills, and support the non-digester additions to the plan. I just want to thank staff as well for being responsive to comments in the first workshop on including non-digester options within the manure management options for dairies. From our work with landowners and resource conservation districts statewide on healthy soils management, we know that many agricultural landowners are willing to voluntarily reduce emissions and to address methane from ag and dairy waste. We therefore echo previous comments in support of incentives. We are worried about direct regulation causing industry to move out of state, and we also echo comments in support of dry scrape conversion and allowing facilities to co-compost manure with green waste. We urge ARB, CDFA, and CalRecycle to consider allowing facilities to accept green waste from potentially local farms and even potentially from dead and dying tree waste to co-compost with manure. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you moving forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Souza. I'm the Director of Environmental Services with Western United Dairymen. I wanted to start off with by reiterating something that's been said, that California dairy farmers cannot pass on the costs of these additional requirements or even voluntary requirements to consumers, because the state sets our minimum price. Milk production in the state is down about 5% since 2014. This doesn't appear to be a growing industry going into the future right now. And so, our emissions are not growing. As noted in the report, dairy families have strived for efficiency and as a result have lowered enteric methane emissions per gallon of milk by about 65% in the last 70 years. And these efforts continue today, and they will continue into the future. However, it's not clear how dairies might achieve the reductions of 25% of enteric emissions by 2030 as set by ARB. The targets for manure management methane reductions are likewise overly aggressive. The targets should be achievable to motivate folks, dairies, to make the changes so that ARB is not setting itself up in dairy families for failure with unrealistic goals. As Assemblyman Cooper mentioned, there are currently about 13 operating dairy digesters in the state, but significant effort and funding has gone into that in the last 15 years to make that happen. But clearly the experience with digesters is that they're not the silver bullet and they're not for everyone. Each dairy is unique in how it's managed and operated, and therefore dairies need a menu of options available that they can choose from for manure management that will work on their farm to achieve methane reductions. And these changes can have other unintended consequences that must be considered, as mentioned in the report, for air quality, for conversions to scrape, and putting in electric generating digesters. The funding will have to be significant and fund the full menu of options, not just digesters. California dairies have been going out of business and relocating to other states because the cost of doing business in California is higher than surrounding areas. If the regulatory requirements are placed on dairies in California, it would only speed up that process while reducing the state's ability to get reductions. We urge ARB to work with us to set reasonable and achievable voluntary dairy methane targets, and so that we can work together towards meeting those, rather than set ARB and dairy families up for failure with targets that cannot be met. And I wanted to mention again that California dairy families cannot pass on these costs. It's not, a cost you're going to put on them and that they can just raise their price and pass it on to the consumer. Therefore, the economics of this and the funding will be vital. And in answer to Ryan's earlier question, Western United Dairymen also has our economist working on the economics part of the report.
Good afternoon. My name is Masood Nishan. I work for a company that manufactures commercial refrigeration equipment used in a supermarket or convenience stores. Hence, my comments are toward the use of alternative refrigerants and the implementation dates that is stated in this document. The problem that at least I see is that all kind of equipment is put together under the banner of commercial refrigeration, whereas there are quite different kind of equipment with their own requirements and needs. As an example, if you all have gone to a supermarket, if the supermarket has a central refrigeration system, yes, as is stated in the document, you can use a small charge ammonia system. You can use CO2 cascade system and also a secondary and so on. If you are also in the same supermarket, if at the checkout counter you might see these small beverage refrigerators or vending machines, yes, they can use propane, isobutane, or CO2 even as a refrigerant. However, there are kind of equipment in these supermarkets that are kind of large and are not connected to a central system, and they are standalone or self-contained. There is no way that they can be used, that we can use ammonia or CO2 in these systems. And there's no way we can use propane or isobutane either because of one, there is a charge limitation, there's safety issues, and not to mention the cost. So there has to be an alternative for this kind of equipment. We have been testing these new alternative refrigerants in these standalone or self-contained, larger self-contained display cases. If they are working, they're at least 20% less efficient than what we are currently using. I mean, obviously, these high energy consumptions are actually the contrary to what we are trying to achieve. If we were to use these alternative refrigerants, less than 150 GWP, and with 20% higher energy consumption, there's no way we can meet the current energy standard, not to mention the new standard that's coming into picture, a DOE energy efficiency standard that's coming into picture in 2017, which is obviously have a tighter restriction on energy consumption. So please consider not all the kind of equipment in commercial refrigeration have the same requirement and can be dealt the same way. There has to be something done, and this 2020, there is no way for the mid-size equipment is acceptable and workable. A workable solution has to be put together. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Kaufman from the Alameda County Waste Management Authority, also known as Stop Waste, here in support of the measure to develop a regulation to eliminate organics disposal in landfills by 2025. Also very supportive of including food waste prevention and rescue programs with a target for that. We've had successful residential and commercial food waste collection programs in our county of 1.5 million people for many years. And we're a complex county ranging with cities of 10,000 people, small suburban cities of 10,000 people up to urban cities of 300,000 people. And the collection programs have worked in all manner of these cities. So we're happy to share our resources that have been developed in our experience. We think that this bill will build nicely on 1826 and is needed to help support the markets and new facilities that are needed for additional materials, but it's absolutely necessary to get to the state's 75% goal and local in our own communities, zero waste and low waste goals. So really, strongly supportive of those things. Also encourage you to look at the ways in which the development of compost also has many multiple greenhouse gas benefits, not only in not only in agricultural lands like the Marin Carbon Trust, but also on urban lands as well. So encourage financial incentives for looking at, for more compost application to do the multiple greenhouse gas benefits of improving soil quality, helping with erosion control and reducing flooding. Thank you.
All right, Mick Scavarlo, on behalf of the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance this time. We have serious concerns with the direct emission reductions from new programs that are being proposed. C believes in a comprehensive climate program with a singular goal, not an emission-specific goal. And our concerns with the SLCP reduction plan is that you're setting individual goals on different pollutants, and we're not looking at the overall picture, and we're losing sight of that. Additionally, we're reducing the value of the cap and trade program, which SEEB is very supportive of within that thing by driving allowance value down by removing different emission reductions from the program. As an overall part of the system of California's climate approach, we would like more emissions to be captured by the cap and less by independent programs. We think that will drive costs down to the public at the same time as achieving the overall emission reduction goal that we're striving for. We do have concerns with the baselines that are being proposed in this, specifically for methane and black carbon. Removal of the 1990 baseline that we've used for over a decade in California as our standard discounts all the emission reductions that we've made and the $1 billion of investment over several years, especially with black carbon. We've made a tremendous amount of reductions over the last few years, 85% since 1990 or thereabouts. And that's based on in like the South Coast Air District, over 500 million a year in their investment, and statewide over $1 billion a year to achieve those reductions in black carbon. And so that achievement, which, you know, in the context of an IPCC goal of 50, you know, of what, 90% reduction by 2050, we're almost there, but we're saying we're going to have to do this on a truncated timeline, and saying California's investment and the emission reductions we've made don't count. And moving those baselines up really misleads the public into what we have done. And you've heard this in other workshops and arenas where the public comes in and are saying we need to do more, look at all this bad stuff, but we're not accounting for all the emission reductions that we've achieved. I think that's just a disservice. We got to stick with that 1990 baseline, even if you're saying, you know, 96% reduction by 2030 or something like that. At least tell the story so that the public is aware of what we've done, and knowing where we've come in that time with sitting at an 85% reduction in black carbon. That's huge. We should celebrate that. We should recognize ourselves as a leader. And Ryan, you mentioned that we are a leader, but when you move that baseline, it really misleads things, and it us any service as an industry that put out billions of dollars in investment to achieve these goals and still have the public angry at the fact that we're asking for another 50% or another 40%. Then we have concerns with additionality. When you go direct regulation, we're going to lose the additionality. I know ARB has been very conservative on adopting protocols for offsets. I know that there's constituencies that don't like the offset thing. However, the offsets provide a great opportunity to get funding to all these people who have projects that are incredibly cost effective. You've heard about the recycling of food waste and stuff like that, and the value that is per ton. That is a great place for GGRF funds. And we think that looking at that as a place for investment versus a place of regulation is what we designed the cap and trade and AB 32 program around. We didn't design it to add a bunch of additional regulations. We designed it to capture as much as possible, and it does. It captures a huge portion of the economy, but we need it to send the revenue and the funding signal in a direction to capture the places where the market cannot. And to that extent, we hope to continue to work with you guys moving forward, but we want this more of a funding mechanism as opposed to a direct regulation route. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Krista Darlington with the Placer Air Pollution Control District, and I'm here to talk about forests for just a moment. 3 points. The first one being, someone already mentioned from like an ag sector, someone who's here talking about a different topic, about the existing facilities and the problems that we're going to see with all the urban and ag waste. So the main thing to say there is recognizing that you aren't the CPUC and you really don't have a lot of authority on how to keep the facilities going. I mean, you guys don't. You could, however, really influence the way they think about this by relooking at that 3% ag burning statistic that the gentleman mentioned, because that's the place where you can really show the fact that we have to extrapolate much larger amounts of emissions from open pile burning and from landfill and all of those other emissions that are going to occur because of the shutdown of those facilities. So not to mention the 500,000 acres per year that the Forest Service is planning on treating, which you cite in the paper. So it's a really important change that I hope you'll make to your emissions projections. Second, I wanted to point out the other thing that the gentleman mentioned, which was ironic, about the efficiency of forest health. It was listed from the legislative LAO's document that it's one of the most effective, actually listed as the most effective pathway for GGRF application of funds. That's for forest health. It would be great if in your economics you could actually reflect what the LAO has been projecting and the information that came out last week and fold that into this plan, because it's very important and telling information, and it's recent, so hopefully you'll get to fold that in. And then the third piece is an invitation really to CARB and to you, Ryan. So for the past year, the Air District has been partnering with Cal EPA, the Cal Fire, the Forest Service, SMUD, and several others on putting together a study that shows the benefits of fuel reductions on fire return interval. So we have this study. It's got a lot of great scientists involved, but we have been really missing ARB in this group. We've reached out a few times. There's been some reasons why it hasn't happened, but now might be the chance. So I wanted to let you know it's happening here in this building on Friday, May 13th at 9 a.m. upstairs on floor 25. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Appreciate another opportunity. My first given name Nazar, next energy name Cosmo, represent Via Water, One Planet ecosystem relation specialist, and we will restore our water as soon as we can. Regarding air is what you're talking about here, to readjust targets and at least to 2020, all of those targets, and very necessary to develop and install air monitor that we will know what type of breath, what type of air we all breathe. It's very, very important. Now also to develop a carbon capturing device that we can capture the carbon gases and reutilize. We can reutilize gases, recycle carbon gases. We can do that. Now, what is most important, I want to bring all of you to attention, another pollution. This is air pollution. The higher pollution, what we also already can focus, noise pollution, very important. Next, what is the highest pollution? It already exists, and we also have to focus is light pollution. Because light and sound, this is the highest. When we will achieve already targets to work on the noise pollution and artificial light pollution, we will can to be a leader in the planet on the most healthiest environment to recover and to sustain healthier and environmental in this area. Thank you. Not thank you. This is actually vibration pollution. Not thanking you, appreciate you. Yes.
My name is Craig Thomas. I'm the Conservation Director with Sierra Forest Legacy, and thank you for spending your lunch with us. I just wanted to say a couple of quick things. One is I really, really appreciate how those of you on the panel and the Air Board staff and Cal EPA and others that we've been talking to really appreciate how you were able to get a hold of and understand the complexities of forest ecosystems and wildfire and black carbon. And I was initially worried that there's a lot of pressure to focus on the immediate fluctuations of the needle on the carbon meter in the big picture, and in the potential to swallow forest ecosystem process up in the need to reduce emissions throughout all the sectors. We were worried that it would get lost because it is ecologically and socially challenging, both in terms of smoke production and really getting a handle on the how unstable the forest conditions are today, because we hear a lot about increased fire severity, the extent of severe fire. What we rarely hear about is the incredible extent and damage from a century of fire exclusion in these systems, which is the fundamental contributor to the problem. So getting a hold of that, bringing it into other discussions such as the Forest Carbon Action Team and the concept paper, not limiting the discussion to just prescribed fire, but as Abby from Pacific Forest Trust mentioned, the use of managed ignitions to get us to an ecologically significant scale of resilience. We can't log our way out of this. It's a tremendous amount of steep ground and inaccessible ground in California, much more so than what is accessible to mechanical treatments. So those focuses around communities to protect human life and property, and there's a place there for fire suppression, there's a place there for mechanical treatments, but we need to ramp up a significant use of fire on this landscape to combine with other tools to get to resilience, or the future is not looking really great out there. If you look at the literature, which I'm sure you all do, predictions are not good unless we can get all tools on board and get to the landscape scale and get to it quick. Last thing I'll say is when it comes to funding, the focus and funding, as we look at how money gets spent to try to solve the issues around forest resilience, aiming at the surface and ladder fuels, particularly those ladder fuels that are expensive and hard to treat, they're 80 to 90% of the contributor to fire behavior. Aiming the greenhouse gas funds, SRA funds, anywhere that money shows up on the table, at those components, you get the best bang for your buck in terms of trying to build forest resilience, and you're rearranging the small trees, which is the dues we have to pay for the last century of past management. Rearranging those trees is going to mean that carbon meter needle isn't always going to be going the way we want it to go, but in the long term, we will get there. So thank you so much for your sensibility to this issue, and I look forward to talking to you more.
Good afternoon. My name is Yana Vasquez. I'm here on behalf of Sierra Club California. I'll make my comments really brief and quick, and I just want to thank the staff and all the work that you have been doing on really providing a really thoughtful plan for the short-lived climate pollutant. From last September to recently, we were able to see kind of a huge change, specifically on California being the first state to actually mandate emissions from the dairy industry. And that's something that for us, we've been really advocating, and really we understand that we have to reduce emissions from this industry if we want to get to the targets that we want to get to. I really commend the staff for keeping the targets from the draft proposed strategy from last year to this year, and really making sure that we are getting there. We understand it's not going to, it's not going to be easy, but really ensuring that through the regulatory process, we're going to get there, and we're going to get there through the stakeholders, and different groups are going to be affected, and knowing that emissions need to be reduced, specifically in the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley, and looking at the communities that are living there currently, specifically disadvantaged communities and low-income communities. And also secondly, we want to also thank you for the black carbon section, and really looking at and really commending the governor for proposing 40 million and really reducing emissions in the sector that need to be reduced, and really looking at how we can reduce black carbon in the mobile source sectors as well. So looking forward to working with y'all as we finalize the strategy and looking for the final product. So thank you.
Good afternoon. Tim Carmichael with Southern California Gas Company. Wanted to say we support the goals of the plan, and we look forward to working with the Air Resources Board and others to achieve them. We also echo the comments made by the Bioenergy Association of California. Thank you.
I thought I was going to be mercifully last, but it appears there's some additional ideas. My name is John Dane. I'm Executive Director of the California Resource Recovery Association. We represent recycling professionals across the state. We have been and we continue to be strongly supportive of the direction of your plan and proposal. We have a particular sensitivity to the challenge that is represented in funding and siting organic infrastructure. We've had occasion to work with Cal Recycle on that, and we would welcome that continued opportunity. We also are supportive of your food waste and food rescue component to the plan. That's an emerging issue, certainly within our membership and statewide. Finally, I would mention that we echo the comments as well and second the comments of the Californians Against Waste, Nick Lapis, having presented those comments previously. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Brian and the panel up there, you guys have got to be wanting to stretch your legs about now. Holy criminy. So Kevin Abernathy with Milk Producers Council and Vice Chairman of Dairy Cares. When I look at the timeline, I look at it from the standpoint of 3, 8, and 13. I look at it from that perspective because there's a handful of us in the industry that actually know the time that it takes to get these projects from concept out of the cradle into reality, and the multiple levels of agencies that all have a very complex scenario, each and every one independently different on their own. And when you start working through those projects, you know, and I sit back and Ryan, I heard a lot of your comments and I agree with a lot of the things that you say, but I also have to say that there's a reality check and there's a counterpoint to virtually everything that you talk about in the draft. Even from Cal Recycle standpoint, I've been working with producers on the diversion side of things. Just the permitting complexity in working not only through the state or the federal agencies to the state agencies, to the local permitting agencies, whether it be RB5 or San Joaquin Valley, down to the county levels that are completely diametrically different from one another. Some have processes, some don't have processes. So I bring this to bear from the standpoint that 3, 8, and 13, yeah, it's aggressive. Is it reality? There's no way. There is no way on God's green earth that we're going to be able to meet these type of, even if the board adopts and passes this with funding and everything in place, the minutia behind this of actually making it a reality is virtually impossible. So I say that from the standpoint that a lot of us feel like we're being set up for failure before we've even been given an opportunity to do anything. And I say that from the standpoint that, you know, this ain't our first rodeo. We've had SB 700. We've had the general order. We've had the heavy duty truck rule. We've had all of these regulatory processes throughout the years that have given us time to develop the science. And I use 700 as a prime example. Most of the regulatory folks thought that the emissions were coming out of the tailpipe of the cow. There happened to be 2 people in the industry that said, no, it's what's going into the north end before it comes out to the south end. I'm one of those people. Multiple millions of dollars later, we were right. So I say that in reference to the fact that we have to move through this very, very methodically and very, very cautiously. The California dairy industry can hit another one out of the park. But please don't set us up for failure before we've been able to embark on the journey.
Thank you. Michael Bocadoro, also on behalf of Dairy Cares, and I'm going to try and bring full circle some of the themes that you've heard from Mr. Abernathy and the others that address these issues from the industry's perspective, with a common theme. And that common theme, you heard it from Mr. Cooper initially today, is that these reductions are overly optimistic, and it's the uncertainty on how we get there. And I think, Ryan, you used the term uncertainty a few moments ago. It's not our friend. You're asking the industry to be comfortable with these very ambitious and
well, they're goals in one sense, they're also targeted reductions in a regulatory sense, and there are more unanswered questions than there are answered at this point. And I think that's what's creating the bulk of the concern. The big one is funding. It remains uncertain despite the fact that we've been having a discussion for over 2 years with the administration, with the legislature, and with this agency about setting an equally aggressive funding strategy to go with the equally aggressive reduction goals that the state's trying to achieve. And that $500 million that everyone agrees is what's necessary just to get started still hasn't been committed to by this administration. And it's impossible for the industry to see how we get there until that happens. The plan acknowledges appropriately that a lot of obstacles still exist to digesters, to biomethane injection, to how we move to transportation fuel. Those are all great things if we can get there. But these obstacles have existed for years, and it still remains uncertain today if and when they will be addressed. It's not for a lack of trying on behalf of the industry's part, on behalf of CDFA's part, on behalf of this agency's part. And so that's an ongoing issue. Uncertainty about what happens after 2020 is also growing, and it has impacts on our ability to finance projects. It's unclear what the courts and what they will rule and how they will rule in the case pending against the cap and trade program. It's unclear what authority CARB has after 2020 as it relates to GHG and what impact that'll have on the low carbon fuel standard program that is critical to some of the economic analysis that's been done by CARB under this program. And that uncertainty creates a lot of market risk and limits our ability to finance projects. Still uncertainty. We've talked a lot about some of the other technologies, moving to pasture, solid separation, moving from flush to scrape. It's uncertain what these other technologies can achieve and at what cost. And we need to understand that before we make the commitment to what they can achieve. What cross-media impacts? You've heard a little bit about that today, and we can talk more about that as part of the economic analysis and in further discussions about the plan. But what are those cross-medium impacts, and what impact is it going to have on air quality as we move from flush to scrape? That needs to be answered. And then there's uncertainty about how we monetize low carbon fuel standard. It can provide a lot of revenue. There's no question about that. But how we monetize the volatility in that market and turn it into something that can be financed from a project needs to happen. And the end point here is that these uncertainties need to be addressed before we set aggressive goals, not after the fact. And if they're not going to be addressed, it's going to be very difficult for us to get there in light of all of that uncertainty. And it's going to create two things, and you heard about it clearly today: leakage and failure. And we'll be sharing more about leakage with ARB in the weeks to come as we have further discussions about the economic implications. But failure is the end game here if we're not successful. If we set aggressive goals, regulate the industry, and all they do is pick up and leave the state, produce emissions elsewhere, the industry's failed and the state has failed in its efforts. So we look forward to working with you to try and get more realistic goals in place, move as far as we can with a voluntary structure before the heavy hand of regulation comes into being, because that heavy hand of regulation is what changed from the last plan to this plan. I think Stacey Sullivan hit this point directly, and that is what's causing the greatest amount of concern, because it's that creates the greatest uncertainty and the greatest potential for leakage and the greatest potential for failure. Thanks.
Thank you. Frank Capone, LA County Sanitation Districts. Late in the day, I don't want to repeat all that's been said. Just a couple of things that struck me in some of the testimony. I think one of the compelling things that was said is that the importance of having a strategy moving forward, not just aggressive goals, but a strategy. And a lot of people have talked about that. For example, there's been talk about going up to San Francisco and seeing their organics program and their food waste program and what they're doing up there. Well, I guarantee you what works up in San Francisco is not going to work in other parts of the state, including Southern California, most especially Southern California. So we need a lot of solutions for the problem. You know, when we're talking about organics diversions, it's not that easy to operate a digester. In fact, it's not that easy to operate a compost facility that well. One of the speakers talked about, well, if you're going to go into a wastewater treatment plant digestion, we have to be worried about contaminants. Well, yeah, we have to be worried about contaminants. We have to be worried about contaminants in just about every process that we do. Nobody wants to go into Home Depot and open up a bag of compost and there's plastic particles in there. So contaminants are important for any market out there and for any operation that we're doing. We think that, once again, it's important to have an overall strategy that has a lot of components to it. Those components have to have regional components. We think wastewater treatment is not the answer, but it is an answer, and it is an answer that's going to get you to where you want to go quicker in the short term, not necessarily in the long term, but in the short term. And we could be a strong partner there. But as just about every speaker here has talked about, there has to be funding for these projects. No pun intended, but we're all feeding on scraps out there of funding. And because of that, just we're not going to get these projects built. You know, we could build these projects very quickly at wastewater treatment plants. The digesters are there, solids handling is there. We need partners in the food side of it. For example, we operated we're on a 3-year pilot project at one of our wastewater treatment plants. We could never get to the full capacity of that pilot because we could not get that food waste. So it's not that easy to get these components out there, and there's so many components to make these projects successful. Getting the waste, getting into the digesters, handling the solids, the biogas, and you've heard of all the challenges that we have with biogas in terms of cleaning it up, getting it in the pipeline. Every step of the way is a challenge. So we have to work with our partners, but more importantly, once again, we need that funding. If the funding is there, I guarantee you these projects are going to come about and we'll be able to reach these goals. Without the funding, there's no way we're going to be able to meet the very stringent goals that you've set out in the plan. Thank you.
Chuck Helgett, representing our Public Services, and hopefully closing down the workshop. First of all, thank you, Ryan, Evan, Emily. It's been a very deliberative process, and the second rendition of the report, in many ways, is a dramatic improvement over what we saw the first time through, which often happens when you are deliberative and work together. The one thing I still, and the report, the general objectives, the overarching objectives from Republic's perspective, we're supportive. But as we've often discussed, we have significant concerns about the 90% by 2025. And in that vein, it seems to me that the report overlooks, as we've discussed, one significant element, a statutory requirement right now, AB 1826. There's really been no analysis of any sort about full implementation of AB 1826 and what that means to achieving our goals. We think that full implementation of AB 1826, full implementation of AB 1594, and full implementation of AB 341 gets us to your goals in 2030. But we also believe that setting a landfill ban is not an incentive to get there. What happens with a ban is if we don't get the infrastructure in place, if we don't get the markets in place, if we don't get the permitting incentives and we don't get the financial incentives, then it doesn't work. We end up with illegal dumping, illegal burning, and waste export. That's not going to be a positive outcome for us. As Bill McGavran said earlier today, it always works better. CARB always works better. CalRecycle has always worked better when we have a combination of regulation and incentives. And that's what we would propose to do and work with you to get to those objectives in 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We did receive a comment from the internet from Environmental Investigation Agency that I just want to paraphrase here. They want to offer their strong support for the measures on HFCs included in the proposed strategy. In particular, they want to support the proposed budget line for financial incentives and bans on the HFC refrigerants above a GWP threshold of 2,500 in 2020. On domestic refrigeration in particular, they note that the 2020 date for a 150 GWP threshold is ambitious but entirely achievable and aligns with current EPA proposal at the federal level under the SNAP program. Second, in addition to HFCs being a very important issue, they understand that the pesticide sulfuryl fluoride is a potent climate change agent that ARB has identified as being 6,840 times stronger than carbon dioxide and its climate forcing effect, accounting for 20% of the state's SLCP F-gas emissions. Does ARB have any additional plans to address sulfuryl fluoride in the SLCP strategy? I'll let Glenn comment on those comments, but you know, we do have 2 pages or so in this report addressing the sulfuryl fluoride issue. It is not in our inventory. We didn't understand that it was a greenhouse gas until after AB 32 was passed and our inventory established. We are following the research and trying to figure out where opportunities to reduce emissions from this exist, but I'll let Glenn follow up.
Okay. Yeah, as Ryan pointed out, you know, we are aware of sulfuryl fluoride. It's already heavily regulated as a toxic air contaminant and a very potent pesticide. So we are working with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and essentially they're the lead agency in managing sulfuryl fluoride, but they will be coming up with a plan to reduce the emissions to sort of passersby if there's a termite fumigation in a house and it is not used as a pesticide in agricultural fields. Right now, I guess, unfortunately, is one of the few options for terminating termites for fumigation. So we're going to continue working with them on alternatives.
All right, with that, I just want to thank everybody. No more comments from the internet? Okay. Reminder that we're having 2 workshops in Bakersfield on May 3rd, if anyone is interested, at 1:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. And we'll be presenting the strategy to our board on May 19th as an informational item. And in the summer or fall, late summer, early fall, the board will be presented with the final strategy and responses to any comments on the environmental analysis. So with that, thank you for your participation today and throughout this process, and look forward to continuing the conversation with you all.